Lately, I've been trying to send you stories every day, but I feel like a large number of people who have signed up almost never come back to listen to the stories. I don't know where that is. Make you unhappy? I hope to receive comments and suggestions from you, and if you find the video good, please give me a like to give me more motivation. For those who have not yet subscribed, don't forget to click the subscribe button and press notification bell to wait for the next story. Now let's get into the story. Story 1. This happened in my freshman year of high school. I'm 20 now, and this is the first time I've thought about it in a while. I was in my third period class, the second to last period before the school day was over. I was in my literacy workshop class. The class was pretty small, probably about 10-12 kids other than myself. We were doing some type of activity as a class, so it was pretty loud. We were all having a pretty good time when the classroom phone rang. My teacher picked it up and immediately looked at me. After about 5 seconds, she said someone was on the phone wanting to speak to me. This caught me off guard, but I assumed it was one of my parents asking a question, but they usually would just text me. I got up, and the teacher handed me the phone and resumed what she was doing with the class. I put my ear to the phone and was about to say hello, when the person on the other line interrupted me abruptly. "I'm going to kill you, chop you up, put you in a bag, and throw your pieces in the back of my truck." He also began giving me my own personal info, like my address, phone number, and the street I live on. He told me what class I was currently in, and my teacher's name. I didn't have an opportunity to say anything before he just hung up. I didn't know who this person was. My teacher and classmates began to wonder what the person on the phone was saying to me, because I never said a word, and I'm sure my facial expression looked a little odd. The teacher asked if everything was okay, and I responded, "Yeah, everything's fine." At the end of class, I was going to tell my teacher what the person said, but I decided not to for some reason. I didn't think my teacher would take it seriously. All of this had me wondering, who the hell was this person on the phone? How did he know all of this information, and why me? Why would he say these things to me? What did I do to him? I have never wronged anyone bad enough for them to feel this way. After basketball practice, as my friend's mom was driving me home, I didn't see anything too unusual. Since this happened in the winter, it was dark by the time we were driving home. At one point, I did notice a black pickup truck that drove away right as we pulled into my driveway, but I couldn't see the driver. I never told anyone what happened that day in class, and I never heard that man's voice, or seen that black pickup truck, ever again. Story 2. When I was about 12 years old, I had a lot of issues with night terrors, and rarely slept a whole night through. One night, I got up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. I sat down half asleep, thinking of nothing but emptying my bladder, and then going back to bed, when I see movement out of the corner of my eye. There was a man standing by the other door to the bathroom staring at me. He was wearing a tattered gray jumpsuit and had a crutch. I don't remember how I got to my parents' room, but suddenly I was there, hysterical. My dad got up and went into the bathroom in the kitchen to look around. He didn't find anything, but allowed me to sleep on the couch in their bedroom anyway. I didn't fall back asleep. About an hour or so later, I heard the sliding door to the bathroom from my sister's room, and limping footsteps. The next morning, my dad searched around again, and noticed that the fridge in the pantry had been raided. I have no idea who the person was, and I never saw him again. Story 3. I used to live in a rented house that sat across the street from a fairly bustling city park. At night, when the park was deserted, I would walk out my front door and sit on my porch and look at the trees and the stars. One night, around 1 a.m., I opened the front door and started to sit down. That's when I saw a man standing in the park. He was directly in front of my house. The man was dressed all in black and was wearing a mask. The mask was just a plain white face, and was extremely creepy to look at. The sight of this guy sent a chill down my spine. He didn't move at all, although I know he was looking at me. The entire neighborhood was silent and still, and we just paused there, holding our ground, looking at each other. We watched each other for a long time, and then he suddenly walked away. I ended up calling the police because I figured this guy was casing the neighborhood, or something. The cops came and took my statement. A couple of months later, I'm doing some yard work around the side of my house. I'm pulling a huge tangle of weeds out from a thicket underneath my kitchen window. I see something that looks like trash. No. I pick it up and look at it. It's the mask that the man was wearing that night. Story 4. I was on vacation in Hawaii with my family, in an area of the Big Island that was pretty sparsely populated. We pulled off the main road to go check out what was supposedly a really nice place to watch the sunset. It was getting sort of late, twilight time, and we finally got down to the spot. We pulled in, and there were 2 other cars in the parking lot. Both older, rusty-looking trucks. We figured they were probably there for the sunset as well, so we got out of the car and began looking around. I happened to glance back at the trucks, and noticed something really strange. In the front seat of both cars were 2 people wearing horse head masks. Not saying anything, not moving, just sitting there. I thought, okay, that's really odd, and I tapped my mom on the shoulder to point it out. She glanced over and saw what I did. My dad just laughed it off, claiming they were probably just prankster teenagers. I waited a few more minutes glancing back at them, before saying that I was getting really weirded out, and that I wanted to leave. My mom agreed, so we started going back to our car. I looked back at the trucks, and the window had rolled down on the side facing us, and the people in the masks had turned and started staring at us as we walked back to our car. We got back in and backed up, then started to leave. I looked behind us, and the people had leaned out of their windows and were watching us, still with the masks on. The road was dirt and really potholed, so it was slow going. After a few minutes of driving, they appeared behind us. I looked back out the window, and they were all still wearing their masks, just staring at us. We got back on the main road and drove away from the house we were renting, and they followed us. The nearest police station was about a half an hour away, but we drove to it, and when we pulled in, to our relief, they kept going. But they all turned to look at us as they went past, slowly, all of them still wearing the masks. We waited for about an hour at the station, and eventually went back to the house, after we were sure they were gone. I spent the rest of the vacation terrified that they would somehow show up again, that they had been following us. I have no idea who they were, or what they were all about. Maybe some locals having a laugh at tourists by creeping them out. Or maybe something worse. Story 5. My mom was separating with her husband at the time, before my father, and was basically on her own to get back to where her family lived. She has good memories of some of the people she hung out with, and even uses those encounters to convince me that people are generally good, which I often disagree with while stuck in traffic. One particular occasion is what caused her to stop hitchhiking. She was in a car with someone who happened to turn down a road that raised my mom's suspicions. You know the kind of road, dark, isolated, unpaved, in the middle of nowhere. As he's driving down the road, my mom asks, where are we going? No response. The guy pulls the car to a stop and then gets out. As he's walking around to her side of the car, she puts her backpack between herself and the door. He opens the door, and she pushes the backpack into his chest and jumps out through the driver's side door. She explained that she basically ran out into the woods and hid behind a tree. The guy kind of walked around aimlessly through the woods for what she explains as an eternity. Eventually, he got back into his car and left. She told me this story when I was about 10 or 11 years old. While people usually are fearful of the crazy hitchhikers, she explained the sign most people tend to overlook. Story 6. When I was 17, I didn't have a driver's license. I walked most places, occasionally catching rides with friends, and less occasionally, hitchhiking. The night in question was one of those seldom seen occasions when I decided to hitchhike, having worked late and being too exhausted to walk home. Now, most of the time when I would hitchhike, I wouldn't get in the car with a lone man, only women, or rarely, men with a girl or kids in the car. This night though, cars were few and far between, and it was very cold. And really, if I'm being perfectly honest, when he pulled over, I took a good look and figured I could take him if he tried anything. He was on the slender side, and had a strange frailness about him. I got into the car after we'd agreed on a destination. We exchanged names, and I warmed my fingers in front of the heating vent. He spoke quietly, asking a few questions along the lines of was I a local, and how did I like living there. He said he'd only been there a couple of months, but found it beautiful, and hoped he could find happiness there. That comment struck me a little odd. It kind of made me uncomfortable, but I brushed it off. It began to snow, and the road quickly got slippery, so he slowed and kept his eyes straight out the windshield, driving silently. I was okay with that, as small talk was never my forte. About 10 minutes later, I noticed a car near the intersection that we were approaching. It seemed to be sliding, so I said, "Watch out." He immediately hit the gas, shooting through the intersection, and burst out with, "Don't you ever raise your voice at me again." Needless to say, I was taken back, and I responded, "Look, this is close enough. Just pull over here, and I can walk the rest of the way." He didn't seem to hear me. Richard, did you hear me? I said you can pull over here, and I can just walk." No response. He just stared straight ahead, driving faster now than he had been since it began to snow. To say I was scared doesn't seem to cover the depth of fear that began to arise inside me. I didn't know if I should stay quiet or speak, but I damn sure was not going to raise my voice again. After about a mile, he began to mumble under his breath. I couldn't quite make out what he was saying, but I assumed he was speaking to me, so I said, "I'm sorry, I can't hear you." He began to speak a little bit louder, and rapidly saying things like, "You're always yelling at me. I've told you time and again I do not appreciate being yelled at. But do you listen? No. No, you're always yelling at me. Well, I'm done listening to you now. Do you hear that? I'm done." I was at a complete loss. I didn't know what to say in response, or if I should say anything at all. I contemplated just jumping out of the car, but I nixed that idea when I realized the door lock was missing. There was just a silver-lined hole where it should have been. My eyes began to water, and I debated with myself about causing an accident by grabbing the wheel and hoping for the best, when he suddenly looked at me for the first time since I had gotten into the car. He blinked several times rapidly, and then slowed the car, pulling into a gas station. I waited to see if he would unlock the doors, not wanting to say anything to set him off again. After a minute or two, he quietly said, "I think I better let you out here," and hit the button to unlock the doors. I wasn't about to hesitate. I jumped out of the car as if it were on fire. I was about to turn and walk into the gas station when he called my name. He looked so damn sad that I hesitated. He apologized, said he was sorry if he frightened me, that he never would have harmed me, and asked if I'd be able to get home okay. I said yes, that I would, and closed the door. He began to pull out of the gas station lot, but then stopped suddenly. He just sat there for a minute, his head down. I froze, wondering what the hell he was doing, and I was about to run into this station. He rolled down his window and yelled out to me, waving something in his hand. It was my hat. I had left it on the seat. I approached his side of the car, and he handed it to me, apologizing again. I didn't know what else to say, so I just said, "Thank you." I watched as he drove off, making sure he was out of sight before moving on, so he wouldn't know which direction I was walking. I had decided to go towards a friend's house, instead of home. As I walked, I went to put my hat back on, and out fell a piece of paper. Folded into the paper was a $100 bill. The paper said, "I'm sorry. Please take a cab, and don't ever hitchhike again. Some people want to kill you, and they don't know why." That was, in fact, the last time I ever hitchhiked. Story 7. I knew a guy named Mike, who ran a coffee house. It was a pretty hip place, kind of beatnik, live music, poetry readings, and open mic nights. But something about Mike was just a little off. He's the kind of guy that would stare at you too long when making eye contact. Girls all hated him and were completely creeped out by him. He had long hair, a beard, and drove a van, which didn't make anything any better. He just had an innate creepiness about him. If you asked him how he was, he's the kind of guy that would respond with, "Oh, I'm good." Just cutting up hookers and shoving them in dumpsters. Everyone just kind of knew he was joking. But still, who the hell talks like that? After about a year, he sold the coffee house to a friend, and I ended up managing it. Business picked up pretty quick after word got out that Mike wasn't around anymore. The place was really starting to turn a profit, and everything was going great. Then he started hanging out every now and then, being his creepy old self, leering at teenage girls, and just kind of being generally inappropriate. I eventually had to ask him to not come back, and it got ugly. He made a scene. Fast forward about 4 years, and I'm sitting on my couch watching TV. The local news comes on, and his face pops up on the screen. He had been arrested for raping and torturing 3 women. He was found with a woman shackled in the back of his van, and he had been driving around all night, tasering and raping her. He's currently serving 3 consecutive life sentences. Story 8. This one night when I arrived for work, my supervisor looked confused and asked me what I was doing there. I said, "I'm here for work," and he said, "But they said you called in a few hours ago, saying that you were sick." I was confused and said it must have been someone else, and they got the message wrong. After everyone else showed up for work that night, it was a bit more weird, but we carried on as usual and assigned everyone their places for the night. I went to work in the control room where I usually work. The control room is the center of the prison that has direct control over the cameras, doors, phones, and everything else. After I relieved the guard on duty and settled in for the night, I looked at the message that said I called in. It said that I had called at 6:50 and said that I had gotten sick while out cleaning up after the storm. There had been a storm the night before, and it was kind of bad, but not anything that I had to go out and clean up. It was truly weird. The supervisor came into the control room about that time. He was also a friend of mine outside of work, and we started talking about it, how odd it was. I decided to call my wife at home and tell her about it, while he was sitting in there with me. I picked up the phone and dialed. After 2 rings, a man picked up the phone and with a raspy voice said, "Hello." I did not know what to say for a few seconds. I looked at the phone to make sure I dialed the right number, and I had. After a few seconds, the person said again, "Hello." In the same raspy voice, I said, "Hello, who is this?" "This is Taylor." "Who is this?" The person said. My head started spinning, because my name is Taylor. And then I asked, "Where is Nan?" He responded, "Nan's in bed." "Who the hell is this?" I dropped the phone and told my supervisor to ring me out. I had to get home. I took off towards the door. I could hear Dave pick up the phone behind me and say, "Hello." Followed directly after with, "What the hell?" I ran to my car and drove home faster than what was legal, my mind racing the entire time. I busted through the door, and my wife was sitting watching TV, and was surprised that I had just come through the door. I asked her who was there, and she said nobody, and asked what I was talking about. After a rather long talk with my wife, I went to call the prison to tell them what was going on, but the phone was disconnected. I went back to work, and when I came in, Dave was acting weird, and asked me, "How the hell are you doing this?" He told me that when I left, he picked up the phone, and the person on the other end sounded like me, exactly like me. He told me he was completely freaked out, and hung up the phone. A minute later, he was watching me leave the parking lot, and my house phone called. He answered, and said that it was me, asking what was going on. He said that I sounded irate, and said that I was sick, and didn't feel like playing games, and was telling him to leave me alone. After convincing him I had no idea what was going on, we went back to work. Later, I found out that the phone line for my area had been knocked out the night before by the storm. This is absolutely the strangest thing that has ever happened in my life. I don't know that I will ever be able to explain it. Story 9. When I was 16 and working at an ice cream store all alone, late at night. It was the beginning of March in Canada, so the ground was covered in a thick layer of snow. I got a phone call. "I can see you." A man's voice whispered eerily. I looked around in a panic. The store had huge glass windows on all sides. I couldn't see anyone in the darkness. I cringed. The man began to vividly describe how he planned to murder me. I was terrified, and as soon as the shock wore off, which seemed like ages, I hung up the phone. I was hysterical. I rushed to all the doors and locked them. Then, I hid behind the counter with the phone. I couldn't help but cry. I called my boss and told him what happened. I asked him if I should call the police, I was shocked by his answer. He said, "No, it was just a prank." Opened the store. That man was probably joking. Just go back to work. I couldn't believe that my boss told me this. He wasn't even making money, because it was negative 15 degrees outside, and nobody was going to come into the store. But he wanted me to endanger myself by opening up, when some psycho had been threatening me. I called my dad, who was furious. He came to get me within 5 minutes. I closed the store, and he took me home. Needless to say, I never went back to work there again, and never spoke to my old boss again. It was the most terrifying thing that's happened to me. Story 10. So this one evening, I'm sitting on the train. This woman behind me is having a very loud conversation with someone over the phone. Something about some guy she thinks is cute or something. I keep listening, mostly because she's too loud to ignore. And things began to get weird. The guy that she's describing sounds like me. The clothes that I was wearing at that moment. So I turn around, and this girl looking into my eyes says, "Oh God, he's looking at me now." The weird thing though, she's just sitting there. No phone, no earpiece, nothing. Yeah, I got off at the next stop. Story 11. So, most of this story takes place back when I was just a little kid. I lived in a nice neighborhood in a relatively small town in Southern California. I had this imaginary person growing up. At least, my parents convinced me that he was imaginary. There is a reason that I don't call him an imaginary friend. I would see him everywhere, but the majority of the times that I saw him, it was in my house. The man was completely black. And no, I don't mean race. I mean actually full-on pitch black. His clothes were indiscernible. His face was blank. The only distinct feature I remember were his red eyes. He had the most terrifying red eyes. The entire eye was red, not just the iris. It's weird writing about him now. I can see them in my mind's eye. It gives me the chills. It would never be an auspicious moment when he arrived. It wasn't the clock striking noon or the second the sun went down. It would be completely random. I would be playing with my Lincoln Logs, and without as much as a whisper, he'd be there with me. He would never do much, just stare and smile. Then, he would leave as quietly as he'd come. The longest he stayed with me was probably a little over an hour, just standing there, looking down. As the years went by, I began to get accustomed to his presence. He would appear, and usually I would just nod. I even got used to using the restroom around him. That's how often he was around, standing ever so close or ever so far away. The funny thing was my entire family knew about him, and to this day they remember. They never saw him themselves. My sister was the one who always believed me. My parents were more skeptical, and eventually it became normal for them to hear about the black man standing in my room. I eventually stopped saying anything at all when he appeared. I tried everything, talking to him, yelling at him, asking him questions. One time, I even got the courage to touch him. He merely stepped away from my reach, so I left it at that, and never tried that again. Occasionally, he would give me a smile. The reason I don't refer to him as evil, hateful, is because he never did hurt me. He never tried. He would just watch and smile. Those red eyes never stopped making me shiver, but that was mostly just me. We eventually moved out of that house. My childhood left me, and I bid goodbye to the shadow man, or so I call him. He was there on the last day before the move. His grin that day seemed to be plastered on his face. It didn't waver for a second. I was about 9 years old at this time. The next years of my life were blessedly free of his presence. No more watchful red eyes. No more crying myself to sleep. Fast forward to age 16. I was walking up to my room one night, late after midnight. I hadn't thought about the shadow man in a long time. I was walking down the hall that leads to my room, when he suddenly emerged from my brother's room. His red eyes focused on me, and he flashed me a huge, wicked smile. He slowly walked across the hallway into my room. This is where most movie protagonists would chase him down and ask for answers. I turned around, walked back down the stairs, and left my house. I sat on the curb until morning. I haven't seen him again since. My sister still remembers him though. My parents remember hearing so much about him, but to this day, they still think it was just my imagination. To be fair, I am a pretty imaginative person. I daydream a lot, but nothing ever physically manifests out of these daydreams. I understand why my parents were skeptical. Story 12. About 4 years ago, I was sleeping and woke up randomly to see a person standing next to my bed. This person was clearly female, but very petite, perhaps a teenager, or just tiny in stature. She was facing away from me and had her shoulder cocked up to her cheek, like the way you sometimes see people holding phones. Her hair was in a low ponytail. There was nothing surreal or ghostly about her. She appeared exactly as you would imagine a person would if you were to wake up in a dark room that is somewhat illuminated by moonlight. There was no mistaking the fact that someone else was standing only a couple feet away from my bed. I jolted upright immediately. Shock is putting it mildly. I remember my heart was pounding. The worst part about it was that she heard me sit up and reacted, turning her crooked head around to face me, as if equally surprised to see me as I was her. I was so scared, I actually closed my eyes, like they do in the movies, thinking that when I opened them, she would be gone, and I could chalk it up to some kind of half-dreaming state. No. She was still there, staring at me. I started to fumble for the lamp on my nightstand. It felt like forever. I couldn't take my eyes off of her. I was so nervous that the noise would further prompt her to come towards me, or something. When I finally switched it on, she disappeared. I slept with the light on for a very long time after that. I did not dream this, and I did not imagine it. Story 13. It's Friday night at around 8:45 of them. The little one's in bed, and I'm chilling with some friends online, gaming. There's a loud bang, and I'm instantly freaking out, due to having my home, my safe place, invaded by some creeper twice in the past 3 months. I turned the volume on my computer down, trying my best to come up with excuses. Oh, it was the neighbors doing something. Who in their right minds would try to break into my house when they can see that I'm obviously awake, with all of these lights on? The lounge light is on. It's quiet for a while. So I return to playing the game, and talking to my friends. That's when I hear rustling. I think it's coming from the game, despite the volume being super low. But to be on the safe side, I turned the sound on the computer off completely. The rustling is still there. At this point, I think it might be that annoying pest, possum, that keeps showing up in my backyard. The banging could have been it jumping onto the garage roof, and now it was snuffling around outside the leaves, searching for some food. As I said earlier, who would try to trespass when they could clearly see that someone was home? If they did trespass, why would they be doing so loudly? I want to say it put me at ease, but it didn't. Fast forward half an hour, and the noises have stopped, and my cat is begging for me to let him outside. I hate opening doors and curtains on windows at night. Paranoia at its finest. But tonight, I had a reason to be paranoid at least. I kept the chain lock on the door, and let my cat outside, and had a bit of a peek through the crack, seeing if anything was amiss on my front lawn. Nothing out of the ordinary, so I lock the door, and head back to the lounge. 5 minutes later, someone tries the door handle. Finding it locked, I hear a laugh, and they start scratching on the glass, as I frantically grab my phone and call the police. Whoever it was had left by the time they answered the phone, and police couldn't find evidence that anyone had been on the property. They did a sweep of the neighborhood, but couldn't find anyone on the streets either. Story 14. I live in North Wales, UK. For anyone who has had the pleasure of visiting, it is truly a beautiful place to live. Though, for an adolescent boy, it is certainly lacking in things to do. As a result, my friends and I would often find ourselves mindlessly exploring areas of countryside and coastline. Despite it being quite sparsely populated, in comparison to the closest cities, there is a dual carriageway running right along the coast from Wales into England. Also, train tracks run alongside this road for most of its course, occasionally passing overhead via a small cement bridge. There was one night a few years ago, when about 4 of us randomly decided to try and explore the inside of one of these bridges, as one of the groups had observed a manhole cover nearby, which we believed to be the entrance. On closer inspection, we discovered that several tools would be required in order to gain entry. We returned with the necessary equipment, and proceeded to unbolt the cover. It wasn't long before we had removed the heavy steel disc, and had started descending the ladder down into the structure. Once we had all safely reached the bottom, we decided to progress to the other side. At this point, we are totally confined into the narrow space that leads into the main area. So as we squeeze and crouch, and at one point scrape along our bellies to the other side of the structure, there is a growing sense of claustrophobia between us. The distance from end to the other is surprisingly long, but by the halfway point, you can look down through narrow gaps into the motorway below. This was actually pretty cool, which helped keep us calm in a strange way. At this point, apart from the mild discomfort and confinement, we were still just a group of guys on an adventure. This was about to change dramatically. No more than a few meters beyond halfway, which we could tell due to the symmetry of the passageways through the bridge. One of us claimed they could see some object in the distance at far end. Slightly hesitantly, we agreed to investigate it. Bad move. I reached the end first, and let me tell you, I have never felt the same sense of dread before or since. In front of me was a single fold-away chair, positioned facing the wall. On the wall was a partially torn page from a newspaper or a magazine, showing a fully naked lady in an erotic position. The reason I don't just refer it to as porn is because something was different about it. I can't put my finger on it, but it seemed more sinister than sexy, if that makes any sense. More disturbingly, the eyes of the woman on display had been cut from the page, removed with precision, not just hastily ripped off. The scene that lay before us had rendered us completely speechless, and an overpowering sense of panic could be felt collectively. That was when we found the condom. The horrendous, gut-wrenching, blood-drenched condom. Needless to say, we got the hell out of there as fast as humanly possible. smashing our knees and shins against the sharp cement edges that lined the path to the ladder by which we had entered. Of course, we were all praying to God that the manhole hadn't been resealed, as it was impossible to tell until you reached the ladder itself. Thankfully, the exit route was clear, and we promptly dashed as far away as our legs could carry us. I'm sure this ending comes as a disappointment to some of you, as we luckily never bumped into this twisted individual who sits in that chair, but I must stress how radically out of the norm this was given where I live. I sometimes think, though not recently, as I had more or less forgotten about that night entirely, about the person who climbs down into that bridge and navigates through the darkness to sit facing the wall and do God knows what. You honestly couldn't envision a more surreal situation. Story 15. Around 2 years ago, I finally moved into a brand new house and brand new building estate in Australia. I was one of the first to have finished building in the area, and was elated to finally gain independence. The first few weeks went by as normal, and during that time, I would often take walks alone with the dog in the afternoons and roam the surrounding estate area. All the roads around us had been partially completed, and all the other properties were marked out, but no other houses were built, excluding one that was directly opposite of mine. The house looked finished, but there was no driveway laid yet, and from what I could gather, no one lived there. To the left of my house, roughly a few hundred meters away, was a field with a huge hill. For whatever reason, the council just didn't want people on it, so the whole area was surrounded by a huge chain link fence. The only other notable feature in the area was a small abandoned farmhouse with a shed a few kilometers down the road. I knew nothing about it, and often went walking there with the dog, as it gave me something mild to explore amongst the vast nothingness I was living around. The entire place was dilapidated and completely inhabitable, but it was still interesting nonetheless. About a month or two after moving in, I awoke one morning to the sound of a violin. It sounded extremely distant and quite haunting. I actually enjoyed it and assumed that the neighbors opposite me had finally moved in. Excited that I finally had some people to talk to, I peeked out the curtain and saw the house opposite mine was still as vacant as it ever was. I got dressed, but by the time I managed to look outside, the violin had stopped. This happened roughly every second day for the next week. The violin would wake me up and then just disappear after about 45 seconds. I had ignored it to the point where my curiosity simply got the better of me. And the next morning, when I heard the violin playing again, I immediately jumped out of bed and shot out the front door. I scoured the early morning surroundings, and there, up on the hill, was a figure playing a violin. It was barely light, but the person looked very tall from the distance I was, and as they were playing, they were doing what could only be described as a waltz-type walk, spinning slowly around in a circle as they played. I took my eyes off the person and walked over to pick up the morning paper, and in the 10 seconds that took me, I heard the violin stop. When I looked up, I noticed the figure was no longer playing or dancing, but was now standing still and looking in my direction. We both just stood there for half a minute, not moving, before the creeps got the better of me and I went back inside. After that morning, things started happening. On my walks, I began to notice footprints on the surrounding properties that weren't made by me and that I had never seen before, which I just assumed were from people walking up from other housing areas down the road. I never awoke to the violin, but I swore I could hear someone walking on the street next to my bedroom window in the early mornings. However, I never saw anything. One night, as I was heading to bed, I turned off the television in the living room and again, could hear the faint sound of a violin playing. However, it sounded more muffled and rehearsed. I froze, and a cold chill flowed through me instantaneously. Considering that it was about midnight, and not the usual time I would hear it playing, I went to the front window and peeked out to see that there was a light in the house opposite mine. It was clearly a candle, as I could see the dim light flicker in the empty window, and the music sounded like it was coming from an old record player. But in the 10 minutes I watched, I never saw any movement inside the house. I moved away from the window sufficiently freaked out, and after another 5 minutes, I heard the music abruptly stop. I peeked out again to notice the light was now out. I never saw anyone. I began to become unsettled in the house and would often invite friends over to hang out until late. But of course, nothing would ever happen when someone else was there. I never bothered to tell any of my friends, as without evidence, I figured they would just give me shit about it and I would just become more agitated. But nothing compared to what happened next. In my living area, the desk sits right next to a small window which looks out to the fence surrounding my property. Unlike most of the other windows, I would never need to cover this one with a sheet or blanket because no one could ever see inside. I usually had headphones on when I played, and I always had the lights off for no other reason than I preferred to play games in the dark. One night when I was gaming, I got up and walked into the dark kitchen and got a beer out of the fridge. It was dead silent, excluding the faint sound coming out of my headphones. As I closed the fridge and turned around to face the desk, I saw directly out the window two very faint lights. I didn't even catch on and immediately started walking back to the desk fixated on the small glowing balls, and it wasn't until I had my nose almost pressed against the glass that I realized the two lights weren't lights at all. They were eyes. A set of eyes sitting just above the fence line staring in at me. They didn't blink. They didn't move. My entire body locked up. All I could do was simply stare back as my brain was still comprehending that there was an actual person looking at me in the scariest way I could ever possibly imagine. I don't know what happened. Either my head kicked into gear or my muscles loosened, but my body automatically collapsed and I fell to the floor scurrying to hide against the wall away from the window. I could hear my heart beating through the carpet like a drum as I tried to lay as flat as possible and as my mind was still processing the sheer severity of the situation. A violin started playing. That damned violin and the haunting tune it always emitted started up. Except this time it was directly outside my window and much louder than I had ever heard it before. The lights were still off and I wanted to get up to turn off the PC screen so I couldn't be seen, but my whole body just wasn't ready to cooperate. Not only was the sound of the instrument extraordinarily loud, but it sounded like it was being played with frustration, notes being missed frequently and the strings screeching. The pace of it was getting faster and faster, and by this time my dog out in the backyard had picked up on the situation and, registering an unfamiliar sound, gave one solitary deep bark. The violin instantly stopped, and the house was finally dead silent excluding my headphones, which I could hear quietly working away. I was still frozen to the carpet, and it wasn't until my dog gave a second menacing bark that I heard the figure outside the window start to walk away in the direction of my yard. Once that first footstep hit the ground, I instantly thought of the welfare of my best friend, my dog. My head connected with my extremities, and my entire body kicked into overdrive. I leapt from the ground and slid across the laminated floor to the back door where my dog was standing staring into the backyard. I ducked to keep low and quietly unlocked and slipped open the door. Usually doing so would notify my dog that he was allowed inside, but when the door opened he didn't move an inch and was completely fixated on the pitch black backyard. Everything told me not to go outside, but there was no chance I was letting anything happen to my dog, and I moved out onto the alfresco, moved behind my dog, put my hand under his collar, and attempted to back him up toward the house. My dog is pure Labrador and weighs like a sack of sand, so when he doesn't want to move, it takes a sheer force to pull him in the direction you want him to go, and right now my dog wasn't going anywhere. I yanked at his scruff, and as I did he emitted a bark like I'd never heard before, a deep, bellowing "get the hell away from me" bark that elevated my nerves to an all-time high. We both just stood there waiting for some form of reply, and I couldn't remember how long we both just froze there, but eventually I heard footsteps from around the side of the house begin to walk away, but not a simple walk, almost like whoever was doing it was slowly dancing in a circle, the footsteps keeping to a beat as they drifted away from the house into the distance. Once I couldn't hear anything, my dog licked his lips, gave me a look, and walked back inside the house. I followed, locked the door behind us, and spent the night reverting to my childlike self, hiding under my bed covers with my dog. I didn't sleep a wink. That was the last time I ever saw or heard the violin player. The following morning, when the sun finally came up, I called into work sick and then called the police. They scoured the lot next to mine and found footprints in the dirt. However, there were so many there it was impossible to make them out. The only description I could give to the officer was his height. He would have had to be over 6 feet to stare over that fence at me, but they explained that he could have been standing on something, or maybe on his toes. They also told me that they have never received a report of anyone playing a violin in the area, or anyone having been in the fenced-off hill either. I essentially looked like an insane person, but the officers were very nice about the whole thing and offered to patrol the area for the next few nights, which helped put my mind at ease. Nothing else ever happened since then. Over the next year or two, people finally started moving in, and I tell them all the story about the figure I saw, some of which still used to keep their children in line, which I found funny. One guy nicknamed the council lot Violin Hill, and the name has stuck around our street since then. I even spent a period of time scouring the depths of the internet for that violin tune I kept hearing but could never find it. There were a few classical pieces that seemed reminiscent, but I've since thought that whatever tune was played must have been self-composed, which creeps me out even more. I'm still in the house. I still tell people the story, and I haven't changed my routine one bit, which has really helped me to block out the fear of the experience. I play games with the blinds closed now. Story 16. This happened around 2012, but I remember most of what happened clear as day. It's a long story, but you'll soon know about the incident with the people that I never want to run into ever again. I worked with my girlfriend at a busy restaurant. We worked all the time and it was very stressful. We took off a few days and decided to fly somewhere to get away from work and people and the town in general. I found decent deals and flights to Ocean City, Maryland for 2 nights. She had never been on a plane. We loved the beach, and I could hit up all the local crab cake spots. It was perfect. We flew into Baltimore and rented a car. Nothing memorable happened the first day we laid on the beach. We hit up all the local shops and had forgettable food. The second full day we woke up and went to the most recommended stop for crab cakes, and on the way back we stopped and got a crab cake to go from 2 other recommended places for later. We stopped by the hotel to drop off the food and went to the hotel bar for a few drinks. My girlfriend at the time was a smoker, and I hated it. She also would attract attention from guys, which I would deal with but wasn't thrilled about. We go to the rooftop bar at the hotel, and the bar itself is a 4-sided island in the middle of the patio. It's probably 2 p.m. and a clear sunny day. We pull up chairs, and there's only a few women on the left side of the bar and a guy bartending behind it. We got obligatory house margaritas. After her first drink, my girlfriend felt like she wanted to smoke, but the girls and the bartender didn't have one to bum her. We got refills and schmoozed the bartender about the areas and things to do, but mainly kept to ourselves. The bartender seemed as if he was Being fake, something was off and I couldn't put my finger on it. A feeling of I really don't even want to run to the restroom and leave her alone at the bar because I don't trust something more than a few times he asked us if we were staying at the hotel. I think I said no. The girlfriend said yes. He asked us what room. At one point my girlfriend went to use the restroom. A minute later I heard guys' voices. I didn't realize there was a group of 3 to 4 guys that sat at a table directly behind us. They were either playing cards or just smoking, but they made some comment to her when she walked back. We finished our drinks and were googling tropical drinks for her and the area hotspots to check out. The guys came up on either side of us and talked to the bartender and got beers. You could tell they were either friends or regulars. I honestly couldn't tell you if they were there when we came to the bar or came after, but they had a sleazy vibe. The girlfriend and I ended up walking to the only other couple at the bar that had come and sat down. It was nice to be away and just relax. We always like making new friends. I didn't realize it, but one of the guys came up and either brushed against my girl or made a comment and rubbed her the wrong way, so in her infinite wisdom she wanted to be bothersome to them and got up and asked to bum a smoke. I didn't realize it until I turned around and there she was talking to the guy with his shirt unbuttoned and gold chains hanging on his chest. I didn't want her associating with them, but if one gave her a smoke I would get the guy a beer if it meant we didn't have to leave the bar to hit a store for smokes. She came back without a cigarette. Mad. Apparently the guys kept asking what's in it for us and said your boyfriend wants to fight us, then why would we give you anything? I didn't want to fight them. I was on vacation and I wasn't paying any attention to them, but I didn't like the implication of the other comment at all because we had such a lackluster first day. I wanted to pack in fun things this day, so this drink was my last one. I asked for the tab and the guy of the couple we met gave us his business card. He said we should meet him and his girlfriend at Secrets at 8 p.m. The guys behind us kind of swarmed in on all sides and slammed down a pack of cigarettes with 2 smokes left inside. In between me and my girlfriend they said something like here, then they ordered another round. We found it odd, but I thanked them and offered them a shot. I don't even think they replied. One asked if we were vacationing, then asked if we were staying at the hotel, then took the round of beers back to the table. I had a weird feeling as if they were locals and didn't like us because we were visitors. Turning back to the bar, my drink was now completely full. Stupid me didn't even question it. I didn't want a refill, but figure the bartender topped me off. I took a sip and the drink was strong. I just closed out, so maybe it was a thank you for the tip drink. It was disgustingly strong. I told my girl to try it. Boozy Susie over here takes a huge pull from my drink and nearly spit it back out. It was gross. She made a face and said that it shouldn't taste like that. I couldn't even ask the bartender about it because he was gone. I don't know when he disappeared, but he was nowhere to be found. I can't remember if I fully finished that nasty drink. My girlfriend said something along the lines of the guys are staring, let's go. I was originally worried she was going to chat them up and thank them before we left, but she said she felt weird. The whole vibe changed and she wanted to go. I remember spending a minute or two saying goodbye to the couple that we were going to meet later and heading towards the doors of the hotel. The guys weren't at their table. Patio door, elevator, hotel room door, bed. My eyes open and I turn my head right. The alarm clock reads 3 a.m. I'm face down in bed on top of the covers. I push myself up, slide back off the bed and stand up. The sliding glass doors are wide open, as are the screen doors to the balcony. There's a breeze. I think to my girlfriend's jump off the balcony, and in that millisecond I hear crying behind me. My girlfriend is sitting Indian style on the floor with a clamshell of what was $40 worth of crab cakes in her lap, crying. She said she couldn't wake me up. She asked me if I remembered what happened. She said she had been sick and had been throwing up for 4 hours non-stop. What happened? I bent over to sit down with her and got hit with a wave of sickness, and I ran to the bathroom for hours puking. By the time I came out, she was passed out again. This had to be a bad dream. I remember thinking that maybe we went to the club and got wasted and blacked out, and I went back to bed. We both wake up at 7 am to our alarms. We had to take the rental to Baltimore and catch a flight back. We both had to be work at 2 today. I was shaking. She looked like hell. We both felt like death. She was shook. She said the walk back to the hotel room was scary, and she didn't remember anything after. Wait, what? According to her, when we walked into the hotel from the bar patio, one of the guys was on a chair near the elevators. He said something to us, but the doors closed quickly. She said when we got to our floor, 2 of the guys were at the end of the hall heading towards us. She said that when we got to the room, they stood outside the door, and she thinks they knocked. Apparently I laid on the bed, and immediately with lights out she couldn't wake me and passed out herself until she woke up to violent vomit. For hours my body was shot. I was shaking, and now I'm processing that these scumbags maybe followed us to her room. Part of me thought she was exaggerating, but you know how you have a weird slow motion flashback. Well, as I was graying out on the way to the hotel room, I remember one of the guys being by the elevator also. As she was brushing her teeth, her mouth was blue. I went to the mirror, and so was mine, neon blue. Nothing we had that day was blue. I had light green margaritas and vodka and root beer. This was proof that something fishy had to have happened. We didn't know what to do. We had to get back. We couldn't stick around. We got to the car. I barely felt okay to drive, but I wanted to be home. We felt dirty. We were so confused, and we wandered out of Maryland and swore we were never coming back. We missed our flight, explained the situation to the desk, and somehow got put on another flight back home. We sat in the airport for hours dying. The flight was painful too. We made it to work a few hours late that day. Nobody believed our story and thought we made it up just because we're being late, and we kind of never brought it up again. I googled to see if similar situations happened and found nothing. We googled blue tongue and saw it's a side effect of a drug. I'll be honest, I felt lucky we made it out of there. I don't know if we were a target of a room invasion or a robbery, or if they wanted to attack or kidnap my girl. It could have turned out ugly in a lot of different ways. What if my girlfriend didn't take a huge swig? What if I drank the whole thing by myself? How close did I come to an OD or death, depending on the drug and its interactions with alcohol? I swear the bartender was in on it. I did call the hotel and asked if there was any issues with the people being drugged or room robberies, and they said no, they have 0 incidents, and I think I let it go. I emailed the hotel from a throwaway email I created and told them to watch the hotel roof bar and the bartender, and never got a reply. And I realize this is a long story, but that's my story, and I think about it anytime someone brings up Maryland. Story 17. Hello, I just wanted to share this pretty frightening story that happened to me back when I was 12. I was recently going through some of my old cringy notebooks and journals with my girlfriend, and found my journal entry where I wrote about this day, and all of the memories came flooding back to me. I used to live in what I thought was a really safe and secure private community. I wasn't allowed to just wander around too far from home without supervision, but because our neighborhood was a gated community, my parents let me walk around within the gates anytime I wanted, even if they weren't home. One day I was riding around the neighborhood after school when I saw a middle-aged woman crying on the floor of her porch with the front door wide open. I was pretty concerned and got off my bike to see what was wrong. She said she was having problems with her husband and immediately asked me to come in so I could keep her company while she calmed down. My stranger danger sirens were going off, so I declined. She kept pushing me, please, just for a moment. I just need someone to talk to. I was raised to always respect elders and to be a good person, but also raised with the previously said stranger danger. So being a young naive kid, I actually felt pretty conflicted about whether I should go in or not. Ultimately, I declined repeatedly, enough that she instead asked me to at least wait outside with her and sit with her until she felt better. I agreed to this since I felt very safe in my own neighborhood. She asked me to wait on the porch for her while she walked into the house and visibly grabbed a couple framed pictures from off the wall. She then sat down next to me inside the house while I was sitting on the porch just outside her door. She started showing me the pictures. One was of a kid older than me in the local high school football uniform, and the other of a man and the same kid. She starts telling me about how this was her kid and her husband. She went on to tell me these stories of how she met him and how they spent their honeymoon in Hawaii, and how her kid was so good at football, one of the best on his team. She was worried that if her husband and her got a divorce, she wouldn't be able to see her child anymore, and she started bawling again, this time on my shoulder. This actually caused me to let my guard down quite a bit. Once I knew she had a kid, I felt more comfortable around her for some reason. She wasn't talking for a while though, and I was beginning to start to feel a little awkward as she was on and off crying on my shoulder, and I didn't know how to react in a situation. What did I get myself into? I kept thinking as I nodded my head and pretended to listen. I was more concerned about finding a good excuse to tell her why I had to go home. She kept calling me such a nice boy and telling me you have no idea how important it is to spend your time with me, which made me feel a little bad about just leaving. She kept telling me she wanted to reward me and make me some dinner if I just came in, which I continued to decline at that point, mostly because I wanted to leave more than being actually afraid. Finally, I told her I had to go, and she asked if I knew anything about how to turn on a cell phone, as she just got her first one recently. I told her I did and could help her out. Before I left, she told me to wait again, and this time left for quite a while. I kept thinking I should just walk away, but part of me didn't want to be rude, especially since she lived around the corner from my house and possibly even knew my parents. My anxiety levels would spike as I got closer and closer in my head to convincing myself to just stand up and walk away. Then it would dissipate and I would tell myself, nah, you just can't leave. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she brought me her Android phone. I had only had an iPhone 3G at the time, and it was my first smartphone, so I was a little bit worried that I didn't know how to use it. I just held the power button down for a second, and lo and behold, it booted right up. She asked me then if she knew how to check text messages. I found and opened the messages app, and there was only one number not saved as a contact in the app. She pointed to it and said, "That's the bastard, that's my husband's number, read me his texts." I opened it up. She had received basically the same text over and over again, just variations on hello and please respond. She angrily said, "Read them to me right now, I want to know what he said to me." I tell her they're basically just saying hello and a question mark. She just reaffirmed in a stern voice, "Read them to me." I started reading them. "Hello, hello, please respond." She just has her eyes closed and she's nodding something, commenting with things along the line of, "That dick, he does miss me. Well, screw him, he had his chance." She turned quickly from this, crying, a distraught woman who was worried her husband would leave her, into an angry and spiteful person who felt like she was in the right. When I stopped reading a couple of times and asked if she wanted me to stop, she would snap at me, "Keep reading." Then I would continue. I started to feel like her husband was a crazy person with this many messages. I must have scrolled and read dozens of messages, almost identical, spanning back for days. My heart was racing. I felt like I was involved in something I shouldn't be involved in. I felt like I shouldn't be here. I really wanted to go home, but every time I stopped, she would get really angry and tell me to keep going. That's when I came across the first message. That was hello. It said, "Stop messaging me, you psycho, and leave me alone. I've reported you to the police and gotten a restraining order. If you come anywhere near my family, you will be arrested." My heart sank. That's when I realized all of the messages I had been Readings so far were being sent from her phone. I paused in shock and she again snapped at me, "Keep reading." I told her I couldn't because it was getting late and my parents had dinner for me. She again said, "Why don't you just come in for dinner? I'll make you something. You can let them know that you were helping your neighbor. They won't be mad, I promise." Only this time she was a mixture of angry and desperate. I told her they would be worried and wonder why I was gone for so long. She pleaded a couple more times for me not to leave her, and she started crying as I stood up. Honestly, I felt really bad about it at the time. I rode my bike home as quickly as I could. My parents had just gotten home from work a little while ago and asked me where I was. I didn't tell them the truth because honestly I was worried they wouldn't let me hang around the neighborhood anymore. When they weren't home a few days later, I came home and there were 3 police cars in front of my house. My heart sank. I asked my parents later that night if they knew what happened. My dad said, "Oh, there was just a break-in or something." I later asked one of my neighbors to see if I could get more information. Apparently one of my neighbors fell in love with a homeless woman after inviting her in for a shower and a place to stay. He got her new clothes and a phone and was trying to help her get her job. Turns out the reason she was homeless was because she suffered from mental illness, and he kicked her out when she was starting to have delusions of this kid from a previous marriage being her kid as well. Honestly, he sounds like a real jerk. She began harassing him after this, so he left the house to his parents' house and sent the kid to his ex-wife's house because he was worried for his and his kid's safety. He had every right to, because shortly after he left she broke a rear window of his house and came in. She had been living there for nearly a week before a neighbor noticed the broken window and called the cops. She apparently trashed the whole house by that point and was arrested. I almost didn't believe it, but I actually went and looked behind the house and saw the broken window. I guess the guy broke his lease and moved out immediately because he was worried she would come back after getting out of jail. I don't know if she ever did and came back, but I hope they disclose this to the new tenants. Honestly, I still get pretty freaked out to this day about what would have happened if I went in that house. Story 18. This is hands down the only time in my life my gut reacted this strongly to a stranger, so I thought it was worth a share. One extremely rare day where there was no work, no class, and nice weather. When I was 19, I decided to go thrifting, so I drove a few towns over to a store in a rural area where I've always had decent luck. I decided to do a gallery wall in my bedroom and needed some cheap frames. I'm on the phone with my mom as I wander through the store. As I approach the frame aisle, I notice a 30-40-ish man standing alone, not in an aisle or looking at anything, just intensely staring at me with a large, almost comical grin on his face. In the back of my mind, I recall how long I'd been in the store, maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and wonder if he'd been staring at me the whole time, or did I just notice this prospect. Made me feel weird, not wanting to take any chances, and believing back then I could dispel any potential weirdness with confrontation. I looked him in the face and said, "How's it going?" in a tone that I hoped implied I'm not interested in any sort of weird stuff today. He says nothing, almost like it didn't register with him. He keeps staring as I walk past, still with a huge bizarre grin. I round up an armful of frames and begin laying them out on the floor. It's early afternoon on a weekday, and there are very few people in the store that I would be inconveniencing by spreading out. Sitting on the floor, still on the phone with my mom, I notice a shadow over my work, and it dawns on me that the man not only hasn't moved on to keep shopping, he is standing over me, not saying a word. My mom picks this moment to want to hang up with me. I try to stall her, but she's at work, so I let her go. I refuse to be deterred from my mission, so I glance at him and keep arranging. But at this point the warning bells were reaching atomic levels in my brain, and I'm getting jittery. I've never had this reaction before to a stranger acting strange, so something was wrong. Still grinning and staring, he finally says, "You're pretty, thanks." I reply, "Where do you go to school?" I'm so nervous at this point I'm actually blurt out the truth. There are 14,000 students at my university. I think to myself, he doesn't know who I am. He would never find me. If worse comes to worse, he doesn't say another word and continues to stare, still grinning. My warning bells are becoming so loud I can't focus, so I gather whatever I have on the floor and stand up to leave, pretending to answer my phone. 19-year-old me wouldn't have dreamed of abandoning a conversation without a polite exit, even with a weirdo, and I stand up, turned, and left this guy. I make my way to the checkout and pray he wouldn't follow me to wait in line. He doesn't. He leaves. Thank God. I thought, why are some people so oblivious to social awkwardness? More so, why was I so freaked out by this guy? It's not like he was the first creeper to ever creep. I stand in the longish line inspecting my purchases, a little impressed that despite my distress the haphazard grab I'd made yielded some decent finds. It's important to know at this point there is a main entrance at the front of the building and a side door opposite to the corner. As the front door, the parking area is an L shape surrounding the exits. My car is parked smack dab in the corner between the two exits. From any point in the store you cannot see my car. I let my gaze drift over to the side exit where I see the man walking through the parking lot. There he goes. Weird, as he walks he is staring at me through the door. A minute later I see him pass by the front entrance, which makes no sense because there is no exit to the road from that direction. You can't even get to the sidewalk from there. Maybe his car is parked over that way. He is still staring at me. Another minute passes and he's revised course to me and back past the front entrance, then past the side entrance again, the whole time still making eye contact with me. As I'm waiting inside the store it dawns on me that he is covering the exits and possibly my car. But how would he know it's my car? Because you told him which school you go to and your bright yellow school parking pass is hanging on your dashboard. Planning his day, you idiot. Being a cocky 19-year-old means you don't often realize you should be worried about some things, and yet I'm petrified when I realize this. I did something I'd never done until then and haven't had to do since. Red-faced and flustered I told the cashier because I didn't know what to do. She immediately offers a male employee to walk me to my car, and before me appears a high school friend who I forgot worked there. He grabs my bags and walks me to my car where the man is standing by my driver's side door. My friend loads my things into the back seat, actually having to motion to this guy to get out of the way, and we make a few words of small talk while the guy stands awkwardly in our conversation, trying to appear casual and unsure now how to proceed with whatever he was trying to do. He never says a single freaking word. My friend closes the door behind me, gives the man a pointed enough look that he starts to wander away, and I speed towards the road. In my rear view I see the man walking out of the parking lot towards the road. He hadn't even arrived in a car or with anybody. He wasn't waiting for anyone but me. When I left his business was finished, or maybe even thwarted. I couldn't stop wondering if his plan was just continued awkward small talk until I could extricate myself, or if he wanted to leave in my car, possibly by force. Story 19. I've recently begun helping my mom sell my childhood home, and it sparked the memory of possibly the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. My friends and I were 15. I grew up in a subdivision about 20 minutes away from any towns. It was a very safe neighborhood. Streetlights on the corners, lots of kids, lots of my classmates lived there as well, and there was never any fear with us walking to each other's houses or staying out after dark. My subdivision was about 3 miles long, and I lived at the very end of it. The last mile is a sharp right turn into a hill and has thick woods along both sides of the street, with 4 houses at the bottom, all surrounded by woods. My friend Maddie lived at the entrance of the subdivision. One year we got about 8 inches of snow and ice. It shut down the roads. People were stranded. Schools were closed for a week. The first days of this snow, me and Maddie and Kelly spent the whole day playing. We decided to have a big sleepover at Maddie's house that night. When the sun looked like it might start setting, we started to trek down to my house to get the overnight bag. By the time we finished packing it was dark out. The woods always enchanted by darkness, but it didn't bother us. The 3 of us started walking, joking Enjoying the night air as we cleared the top of the hill, we saw something that made us stop in our tracks, a hooded figure standing on the corner. Illuminated only by the street light, they didn't move. They stood completely stiff. Staring straight ahead, it was unsettling, but it easily could have been a neighbor, so with nervous laughs we started descending the hill. The figure never moved. Staring straight ahead, as we got to the bottom, we could see the hood was lined with fur, and it had some sort of black mask hiding their features. We started to get nervous. At this point we were even with this person. It's blackout, the one street light illuminating the corner. After staring at the figure for about 45 seconds, madly finally called out, "Hey, stop messing with us." It's not funny. At this point the figure moved, only shuffling its feet to turn its body in our direction. They extended their hand towards us. Time stopped. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. The figure gestured, "Come here," before turning and walking into the woods. We ran as fast as our feet would take us until we reached Maddie's house and deadbolted the door behind us. The next morning when I walked home, I stopped at the corner where the figure had been and felt pure genuine fear. There were 2 tracks of footprints, one leading out of the woods and one leading back in. Story 20. Okay, so first of all, I don't want this to seem like a story in search for sympathy, but more of a way to finally accept it and move on and hopefully help other girls or boys realize these red flags in a relationship that I so blindly overlooked. I'm sorry if this story is a little long, but bear with me. It's worth the listen. Background information. I'm 18 years old. I met this boy, we'll call him Trent, and I met through a mutual friendship group of friends that I was very close with for many years. We started hanging out as a group to smoke with our friends. He was the loveliest boy with such kind eyes and the most adorable smile. I was infatuated. Trent had a past before I knew him. Troubles with past girlfriends and a bit known for a bad temper, but I ignored the warning signs from multiple people and even an ex of his, assuming the classic lie, "He'll never hurt me," though we started dating late March last year. 21 to be exact. He asked me out on a night when we had taken a lot of Xanax for fun with his friends and was expressing to me and his friends within 2 months of knowing him how he was completely head over heels for me, and that made me fall deeper and deeper. Everything was so exciting and new, and he gave me butterflies. Side note to this: I had been diagnosed with severe anxiety disorder and bipolar 2 disorder, which just adds to the fun of my life. All was good until about 4 months of being together. I was at home one night, planning to push through it and go out for some drinks with him and some friends, but changed my mind as I physically could not leave my bed that night. He disappeared. His phone was off for hours and worried me sick. In the morning I wake up to a message saying his phone had gotten broken when he got pushed into a pool and had to leave it to sit and rise overnight. He came over to my house that day and took care of me while I was sick. 2 months go by and I found out 3 days before my birthday that on that exact night he had cheated on me after he enticed his ex-girlfriend to go over to his house, saying that he was going to take his own life because we had a fight and I wouldn't speak to him anymore. They had sex that night, and when I found out, it broke me. My heart ached and raced. It pounded in my chest, and I left his house in tears with him chasing me up the street. I hid in a driveway and turned off my tracking location that he set up on my phone and caught the first bus that I saw after hiding and watching him pace around the streets, shirtless and shoeless, while searching for me. An hour later, I decided to answer his call number 23 or so, and tell him to leave me alone. It was then that he screamed and cried and begged, but I didn't give in and so ended the call. 2 minutes later, he called me saying he needed to go to the hospital as he shattered his hand while punching a hole in a glass mirror behind his door. After a few weeks of my heart longing for him and him begging for me, I felt like he must have really loved me to do all of this. The stupidest mistake I've ever made. His behavior continued throughout our 6-month relationship. If I didn't answer a phone call, I would receive 10 within 5 minutes, and 10 messages of how I was a dog. Even if I had just left my phone in a room for 20 minutes while I had dinner, he demanded to see me all the time and begged to be by my side every minute. I saw all of this as an expression of his love to me. Our relationship was spent majorly smoking weed daily, and I mean all day. If he wasn't stoned, all hell would break loose until it could get high again. I spent hundreds of dollars buying weed to help him feel better when we would argue in the car, or he would be in a bad mood. He had made threats to me and my friends in the past about killing all of the dogs. My friends did not see it the way I did, and eventually we had fallen out, and he assured me that they weren't my true friends. He was the only real person I had in my life who truly cared and loved me, and I believed if my confidence diminished, my happiness was released in the smallest doses. I began to stop recognizing the girl who I was and couldn't remember how it felt to have genuine happiness only when he was in a good mood and wanted to be intimate and cuddly. That's when I felt good. On our 6 months, we had a lovely dinner in the city at a super expensive restaurant. After our meal and a few drinks, he told me to go wait around the corner for him while he paid, and I called the cab. I found out when he walked out that he had not paid, and we made a run for it. Later that night, we went to visit our 2 best friends who were also a couple and were part of our smoking squad, as we like to call ourselves. We decided to go for a little drive around the corner and smoke a little bit before going home. It was while we were chopping up that me and my friend Bella were whispering in the back. Trent couldn't quite understand what we were talking about and demanded to know what we were saying. As a joke, Bella sarcastically replied that I was talking about another boy. This is when he ran over to the side of the car. As he did this, I pulled the lock on her door and he punched a hole straight through her window, leaving shatters of glass flying all over him. The police came for a noise complaint, and after coming up with an excuse, I was left to walk my boyfriend home while he was sobbing and apologizing. Eventually, we were escorted home in the police car. We broke up that weekend after encounters of him smashing his head into a wall, swiping a photo frame off the table, and slicing his hand, punching a hole in my brother's car windscreen, and grabbed my shirt while I was driving. I had officially been scared and saw for the first time that he might really be dangerous. I told him I could not be with him after the damage to my brother's car. My family would never look at him the same and would ban me from seeing him. The very next morning, he made me pick him up at 8 a.m. and he took the car to get the window fixed so I wouldn't leave him. In short words, I didn't forgive him. A week later, a week of hundreds of missed calls, thousands of messages off every single social media possible, he began sending me photos of bottles and Xanax that he was buying, telling me that he was going to beat them all and it was going to be all my fault. My heart dropped, and I answered his call and begged him not to be so silly. I told him I would go and see him that afternoon to make sure he was okay and not to get back together. He seemed happy with that and hung up the phone. That day I was with a couple girlfriends at a pool party with some of my old friends that he didn't particularly like. After being there for maybe an hour or so, I bet you can guess who just lets themselves in and walks straight inside, demanding to everyone that I leave right now. I refused, and I was petrified. His eyes, I knew that look. The way his green eyes turned almost black when he was in a rage. I continued to refuse and told him I would come outside and talk to him if he let me bring one of the boys outside to make sure I was okay. He didn't take that one bit and decided to leave. Okay. That was a relief for me. Less than 20 seconds later, we hear smashing in the side street. The whole house ran outside to investigate and watch as Trent ran back to his car and sped off after ripping off the windshield wipers of another one of my best friend's cars and shattering each window. At this point, we were all so worried and angry and confused. So we decided that we should drop the damaged car to my house so it was off the streets and somewhere safe. However, my car was parked a few streets over. I got into the car and began driving. When I was rammed into an intersection, my car was spinning and I quickly gained control, only to realize that he was chasing me in his own car. We zoomed through the traffic, through red lights, intersections, squeezing through almost impossible car spaces like in a movie. I almost hit 3 pedestrians, and God knows how many cars. He chased me down the streets, continuously ramming me, then slowing down and speeding up just to ram me again, glancing back in my rear view mirror. I saw him laughing and taunting me. Those eyes I will never forget. Immediately when I noticed him chasing me, I called 0. It's Australia's 911 and tried frantically explaining to the operator where I was and what was happening whilst being rammed and trying to dodge cars and people and sidewalks, poles and street signs. I thought I would throw him off and turn into a car park that was right there, but he was too quick and sped in front of my car, locking me in while he blocked the exit with his car. The door opened and he stepped outside, throwing himself at the windows and trying to rip open the doors. I screamed into the phone and begged for help, but they just could not seem to find me. Eventually I decided that the windows were going to give out soon and I needed to get away. So I drove up the gutter, ripping off half of the front bumper of the car, and sped all the way back up the street. I thought I got away when I saw he was struggling to get back into his car, but that relief shattered when I saw his white car right behind me again, ramming and stopping while he left. I drove through 3 suburbs and drove straight to my dad's house. I honked the horn like a crazy person, but his car was quick to catch up and I could not bear the thought of putting any one of my family members at risk of this maniac. So I kept going, hoping that he wasn't quick enough to swipe my car off the cliff edge that runs alongside my street. I continued driving over the top of all of the roundabouts, but I didn't care. My mom lives around the corner from my dad's, and I started to head there. But as I reached the street, I remembered my 5-year-old sister and my mom, and I couldn't dare putting them at risk. So I kept on driving around corners, swiping into cars and trying to find every main road possible, begging for help to the operator and for them just to please find me. I continued to fly down the street at 120 miles per hour. I'm an 18-year-old girl. I've never driven so fast or so chaotically. After about 10 minutes of what seemed like an hour, I reached yet another main road and repeated my location to the operator, all the while being rammed and tormented. He sped up in the lane next to me, in the opposite side of the road, and swerved his car into the front of mine in an attempt to lock me in, so he could try to rip me from the car. My immediate reaction was the reverse. I put the car into reverse and put the accelerator flat to the floor. It only took seconds for him to get back into his car and begin driving at me head on. The only thing I could do was drive forwards at him. This is the part where everything went in slow motion. I saw him coming at me. We were driving at each other at about 40 miles per hour, and my only options were to either crash into a parked car next to me, crash head-on into Trent, or crash into a telegraph pole on the other side of the road. Only thing running through my mind was which way would be the quickest and least painful way to die. So I chose the pole and I took a hard right turn as I missed the front of it by being saved by the gutter, saving my life by mere inches. This really made him mad, and he turned the car back around again and T-boned the driver's side door, pinning me in. He got out and yet again punched and kicked and slammed all the windows. Now let me tell you, this boy is at least 6 feet tall. He was massive. I stood no chance. I began to hop from seat to seat, trying to stay away from him, to whichever window he broke out first. The whole chase lasted 17 minutes. This is when the sirens began to ring, and I broke down and cried as he ran back into his car and took up off the street. He jumped 5 fences before they managed to tackle him. He spent a weekend in a holding cell and was released on bail. My heart ached, my head spun, my mental illness had reached an all-time low, and without him I was ready to die. The situation made me want to die, but for some strange reason, I still loved him. It made me sick. But I still did. He was handed a restraining order. But that didn't stop him. The day of his release, he began apologizing, begging, crying, saying he had no memory of what he was doing and he was so sorry that he would never do it again. This is the part where you're all going to hate me. I wanted to take him back. I told him I still loved him and I still spoke to him daily. He told me he wouldn't have done those things if I didn't make him so angry, and I apologized sincerely, but the jealousy and protectiveness continued. More threats. Shouldn't have called the cops and just let me kill you. I'm going to kill everyone close to you. I hope you die tomorrow. I'll laugh. The list goes on. And it took me 2 months to wake up and realize what I was doing. After he had bashed a boy that I had kissed, and started doing drive-bys at places that I would hang out, just staring at me. The saddest part is when I asked him what would have happened if he had broken the windows and gotten into my car, he replied with, "I honestly don't know. So girls and boys, if you ever feel mistreated, speak up. If you notice red flags, don't ignore them. A leopard never changes his spots, and if I had have stayed with him, I wouldn't be here today to tell you the horror story that was my first relationship." Story 21. So about 10 years ago, I was in college and decided at the urging of some of my friends to do an open invite D&D session at my apartment. It was really close to the college itself, but not on campus, and it wasn't part of the dorms in any way. It was above a restaurant. So it was pretty clear that my apartment had nothing to do with the student housing. This is important for later. So the night comes and the stage is set. All in all, everyone seems nice and things are going well enough except for one guy. There always has to be that one guy, so I try to let it slide. He's being really pushy and going on and on about his character's background and this and that when we have not even got to him yet and are just trying to set up the story and play the game. Then because he has some grudge against another guy there, he starts passing me notes and trying to get me to randomly help him kill this guy's character for no reason. First of all, that would have made no sense in the setting of the game. Secondly, that would accomplish literally nothing for those who don't play D&D. It's not like if your character dies in a random one-off game, you have to just trash it and never bring it out again. Thirdly, this guy was just all up in my personal space, whispering in my ear and passing me notes and telling me how to play, like he was in control of the game, or me in any way. It was really uncomfortable and weird. I didn't want to make a scene, since I didn't know how everyone who showed up knew one another, and decided to just ignore him and try to have a good time despite the fact that he would not get out of my personal space when it became clear that I was not going to listen to him and help him kill that other guy's character. He had a meltdown. He literally stood up and started throwing D&D books at my head, all of them that he could reach, and screeching that I should have done what he told me to do. And this was my punishment. And next time I had better listen. I opened the door and told him to get out. He told me I couldn't kick him out because somebody else had invited him. I told him that I didn't care who invited him. This was my apartment that I paid rent for, and I had every right to kick him out. And he was lucky I wasn't calling the cops. The rest of the table backed me up and pretty much ended up having to shove him out of the door and down the stairs to get him to leave. The dude could not grasp the fact that no means no, and his actions had consequences. I'm 100% sure that no one ever made him have to follow through with any sort of punishment before. By the baffled look on his face as I closed and walked the door behind him and went back upstairs. So I get back upstairs and people start apologizing to me and telling me he is like that all the time, and they didn't actually invite him. He just shows up wherever letter 1F25UU they go, and they can't get him to leave them alone, and every time they try he throws a tantrum. We get back to the game and things are going pretty well for about 20 minutes. until I hear my doorbell ring. So I go downstairs. And it's the tantrum guy with some other guy that I've never met before. The tantrum guy is standing behind this new guy with his chest puffed out. And this whole look about him, like, you're in trouble now. So I've opened the door and ask if they are here to apologize for the tantrum guy assaulting me earlier. And the new guy immediately turns around to look at the tantrum guy. And it's clear he did not get the whole story. I tell the new guy what actually happened, and he tells me that he is an RA with the school. And I have to let the guy back into my apartment if I'm holding a school function. I tell the RA guy that first of all I rent this apartment, and it is not part of student housing, as should be apparent from the fact that it is, again, above a restaurant. Secondly, even if he was an RA, which I have no proof of, as he could just be one of the tantrum guy's friends, that doesn't give him the authority over any building I'm living in, because he is not my RA. But that doesn't matter, because again, I don't live in student housing. I live in an apartment above a restaurant. Finally, that this is not a school event. It is a private gathering, which he would know if he was a real RA, and not some guy that the tantrum guy snagged to come back here to try and do. I don't even know what at this point. This RA guy keeps insisting that I have to let him into my apartment, and that if I am a student, then wherever QQA60M0 I live is student housing, and that he needs to come in to inspect the place. It becomes more and more clear that this is just some random guy that they wanted to be in my apartment for nefarious purposes, thinking that I am here alone for some reason. I tell them that they are not getting in, and if they continue to stand there and try to get me to let them in, or if they try my door after I leave, I'm going to call the cops. And I proceed to shut the door and head back upstairs. Everyone at the party was asking who that was, and when I tell them, they all decide it's time to head home. I tell them that they really don't have to, but they tell me it's getting late, and this whole thing is starting to weird them out, and in weird ways that I can't really blame them for. When I go downstairs and open the door for the tantrum guy, when I go downstairs and open the door for them, tantrum guy and the RA guy are across the street and seem amazed for some reason that these people were still in my apartment and were now leaving. I never had any more trouble with them, but I also never had another D&D night. It just didn't seem worth it. I still play, but just with groups that I know, and I never saw those two guys again. Story 22. Let's start this off with some background on me. At the time, I was already a hardened recon trooper. This was my first long-term tour of combat. I had not even a month prior seen one of my best friends killed right in front of me, while two others were permanently maimed in a horrible ambush in the city. It was a nightmare watching my friend die from massive bleeding, us not being able to do much except give him morphine to keep him from the pain. That was terrible, and I'll never forget. But not even that spooked me to the core as much as this did. After that ambush, we were moved out of the city to a forward operating base. It's like a small city walled in with concrete T-wall barriers and HESCO barriers. Think big 4x4 boxes filled with earth and stacked 16 feet tall to create a huge wall about 1 meter times 1 meter, stacked 4 meters high. This particular FOB was interesting in that some of its barriers to prevent easy entry were simply huge mounds of dirt with guard towers planted on top of them to ensure people and vehicles didn't just run in at random. Being the recon force, we were tasked with constantly going outside the wire to do patrols and be the land and airspace quick readiness force if something happened and someone needed fast and skilled firepower or extraction. For this duty, we were assigned helicopters and light armored Humvees, and we lived next to the improvised airfield on the outskirts of the FOB. Our housing consisted of tents covered in insulated foam to provide a more permanent structure with air conditioning units to keep us cool as we slept and worked, maintaining our gear and whatever else we lived. 4 guys to a tent, as each of us had a ton of gear. We had to keep mission ready for a variety of missions. There were 20 of us. in total separated into 2 squads and teams, and we shared this little tent village inside the wall together. In this instance, we had just gotten back from a late night air assault mission. Everyone had gone to bed after having finished cleaning our gear, and meeting in the middle of our tent village was the latrine trailer, a house trailer fitted with showers, sinks, and toilets so we could keep ourselves clean. I woke up around 4 a.m. and needed to use the restroom, so I grabbed my headlamp, my rifle, and one magazine and headed out the tent to the bathroom. As I was walking to the trailer, something just felt off. Maybe it was a slight change in air pressure. It didn't fully register in my mind as I just had to go, so I quickened my pace to the trailer, went inside, and did my business. I pulled my shorts back, washed my hands, and walked outside staring at the ground to make sure I didn't fall down the stairs on the trailer or stumble on some rocks. As I rounded the corner, I lifted my head and saw a pair of green glowing eyes set in the darkest fur I had ever seen. 12 inches from my face. I'm not a tall guy, and I'm around 5'7", and maybe it was just the adrenaline kicking in, but I swear this thing was looking me eye to eye, and I figured I must be seeing things because I'm so tired. So I turned my head, and when I looked back, there was nothing there but a wisp of dust in the air. I stood there for a second trying to collect myself, and then I looked back at the ground and saw paw prints that were at least 4 inches wide. If I hadn't just relieved myself seconds earlier, I probably would have. At that point, I was shaking and sweating like I had just been in a firefight. I locked and loaded my rifle and peeked around the corner to make sure it wasn't still there, and I made my way to the radio tent to tell the 2 guys that were still awake what just happened, and then I carefully made my way back to the tent and went to sleep. The next day, one of the first bullet points on the daily briefing was about some huge panther that had escaped a local sheikh's compound and was eating local shepherd's sheep at night, and how we should be on the lookout and never leave your tent without a battle buddy. As the guys all chuckled, there were signs posted at the chow hall and in the tiny shop on the FOB2. We never did see that thing again, and I don't know whatever happened to it, but I know that whenever I walk outside my tent late at night after that, I was always locked and loaded. Story 23. So this happened about a year ago. I like to dog sit for my co-workers in the hospital for extra cash. One of the nurses wanted me to dog sit for her while her and her family went out of town. I had done this so many times, so I had no problem dog sitting alone. She lived in a very nice area of town, so bad things weren't likely to happen, or at least that's what I thought. She told me that her husband was a police officer for the city they lived in, but his guns would be locked away. She also went on to tell me that they have a security system that will record anything by all the doors. She gave me the lock information if it was needed, but I insisted that I should be fine. Now fast forward to me dog sitting. The first couple nights were fairly normal. It was a big house, so it was a little bit creepy, but nothing I haven't dealt with before. One night, me and the boyfriend at the time were watching TV in the living room. The blinds were all open to the backyard. It was most likely around midnight, since me and him both work night schedules, and we saw a light flash through the yard, but it wasn't a car passing by because it angled down to the grass. The dog was in the kennel since he was a pup. It needed to be in for sleep, so the dog wouldn't have been able to go and find someone. Well, we both noticed it, so we decided to go outside and check it out, but no one was there. Absolutely nothing or no one. So naturally we went to bed because now it was getting to be 2 a.m. While laying in the bedroom upstairs talking, we heard a door shut from downstairs. I immediately shushed my boyfriend at the time and said, "Did you hear that?" And he said, "Yeah, but I don't know what it was." He gets up to lock the bedroom door and turn off the lights. He whispers to me, "Be quiet and listen." We sat in the dark room shaking. We heard yet another door shut downstairs. He tells me, "Call the cops," as he grabbed a lamp at bedside and stands by the door, and I was on the phone with the operator. She tried to call me down, telling me officers were on their way to the scene. Then we heard footsteps of our invader coming upstairs to where we were at. I Started to quietly tell the lady on the phone the person was upstairs with us. Now we heard a knock at the door and footsteps going back down the stairs. I cried telling the lady there's a knock at the door. She reassured me that it was the cops, but I had to come downstairs to let them in. I told her, you're insane. A person in this house and you want me to go downstairs? She tells me that it's protocol to let them do a search, so me and my boyfriend ran down the stairs as fast as we could to open the door. Lamp still in hand, we opened the door for the cops and told them there was someone here. And what we heard, they walk into the house telling us to wait outside while they investigate. One officer goes straight outside to the back as he yells out into the dark, if anyone is out there, make yourself known. Me and my boyfriend heard rustling through the bushes near us. The officers didn't find anyone in the home, but we know that there was. We know what we heard. Fast forward a couple months later, we were watching a movie about an invasion. I believe it was Open House on Netflix, and we got to talking about our experiences together. Come to find out that the same day of the invasion, I believe I met the intruder. I remembered it was outside around morning time getting ready to go into my car when a young man walking by asked me if the car in their driveway was for sale. I'm not sure I'm dog sitting for them, but they should be back in a few days. He thanked me kindly for texting me and walked off. I had no idea at the time what I had done, but I know that the man walking by was our invader. I still am afraid to dog sit again. Story 24. I'm something of an avid cyclist, and I have been all my life. It's my preferred method of transportation. I also live in a town that's famous for its ever-expanding network of pedestrian bike paths. We've even won some awards for them over the years. I'm also an Iraq veteran. This may explain something that happens later. The summers where I live tend to be quite humid but otherwise pleasant, so one gorgeous August day off from work, I decided to go for a ride. I didn't have a specific end of destination in mind, but I got this idea to ride along the southbound trail that I don't go through very often. There are enough traffic lights along that section that it should have been a relatively safe ride, and it also goes along the border of a rather popular city park. I figured there'd be plenty of people there, especially on such a nice day. Well, I was kind of sort of right about that. About 20 minutes or so into my otherwise smooth pleasure ride, I come up to a couple of bends in the path. Not long before the park, there are a few people jogging or walking their dogs, one or two people walking by themselves. So far nothing unusual. The trails are paved and divided into two lanes, just like a regular road where you're supposed to stay on the right hand lane. Not far ahead, I noticed a dark-haired guy walking in the wrong lane. It's not illegal to do so, but it can be dangerous. I noticed that he seems to have no regard whatsoever for others walking in the proper direction, and almost bumped a few of them without a thought. I figured maybe he was drunk, but I also saw that he was wearing what looked like an old navy blue puffy jacket. On a human day in August, maybe you can call it situational awareness or what have you, but no one in their right mind wears a full jacket in the summertime south of the Mason-Dixon line. I'm about 30 feet away from this guy when he finally sees me, and my stomach drops as I swear to everybody on my own life. He pauses mid-step, and then his face melts into a downward-facing jokerish smile. Then he opens his jacket, revealing a sweaty gray shirt underneath. As he reached inside for something that I couldn't see, and that's when something goes into my head. No way, guy. I don't know what some of you listening to this might do if faced with something like this, but I got this crazy idea inside. Instead of turning around, instead of screaming or stopping, I pedaled faster. Without a second thought, I just spun the pedals as hard as I could with the intention of charging him like a medieval jouster. Dangerous moments like these may only last a few seconds in reality, but I swear I felt like I was building up speed and barreling towards this guy for a good minute or two. I don't know why my brain decided that charging him head-on was the thing to do, and maybe it could have easily just gotten me hurt or killed, but I didn't care. I can point at Mosul, Baghdad, and Fallujah on an unlabeled map of the Middle East. I was scared, of course, but something I haven't felt since I've been over there. drove me to something. He sees me speeding up and hunkering down but isn't getting out of the way. Only within a few seconds, maybe less than 2 feet shy of slamming into him, does he realize what's about to happen, and then he dives to the left. I don't stop, I don't look back, I don't even think about it, I just keep on going. I later happened to pass a female jogger or two coming the opposite direction and gave them a heads up about the guy. They promptly turned around. I sought a different route home that day and locked all of my doors when I got home. I haven't been on that stretch of the trail since. I didn't think to tell police at the time, given that I wasn't actually harmed and that just getting scared isn't a crime in itself. But about a month later, a local news story crossed with my Facebook feed. The filth rotting body in less than 2 years was just discovered near that same area of the trail near a creek. The police said that they weren't sure exactly how a homeless man had died, that it didn't look natural. All of the victims were known vagabonds, people that nobody would otherwise give a crap about. I'm not saying that I definitely BS'd a serial killer, but to this day I often pound the possibility. Story 25. 5 seconds in my entire life was sent into ruin. Count it. 1. I looked around trying to find an exit. 2. There were people everywhere. I could barely move. I was holding on to my son's hand. 3. His hand slipped away from mine, and 2 more precious seconds would go by before I realized it wasn't because he was reaching into his pocket for his favorite toy. 4. I fumbled around my coat from my phone without looking, still trying to figure out exactly where we were in this far too crowded fairground. 5. Dylan. And like that, he was gone. It didn't matter what I screamed. It didn't matter that they caught the giant on camera. 1 hand over my son's mouth, my son who looked like a rag doll on the giant's arms. It didn't matter that for months I pleaded for the public for help, that the FBI conducted a nationwide manhunt, that Dylan's face joined the long line of smiling children who were never found again. Dylan had been swallowed up by the earth. He had only wanted to see the clowns for his birthday. On the first anniversary of his disappearance, my son would have turned 6 years old. Instead, a man walking his dog in the early hours of the morning found Dylan's body rotting away in a hollowed-out tree. Clearly, the inspector said Dylan had been dead for a long time, frozen. They said the giant had frozen his body. No one knows exactly when Dylan was killed, but they do know this: Dylan didn't die on the day he was taken. There would have been plenty of time, for I never asked for details. On the second anniversary of his death, Dylan would have been 7 years old. Instead, at exactly 1 minute past 12 a.m., I received a message on my phone from an unknown number with 1 photo attachment and only 2 words: "For you." I think in the abyss of my heart I knew exactly what I'd see when I opened up the picture: Dylan's rotted corpse in the hollow tree. Only this photo had been taken at night. The edges of the picture were almost completely black. The flash had thrown my son's dead body into a white-hot relief. In front of my eyes were the details I'd never wanted. Both the police and the FBI failed to trace the source of the message. On the 3rd anniversary of his death, I had a new phone, a new number, a new house, and a new state, and a new life. Dylan would have been 8 years old. Sometime during the day, I received a new message from an unknown number with 1 photo attachment: "For you." I couldn't help myself. I opened up the file to see my son dead, but not in the hollow tree now. He was lying on a couch. It was clear he hadn't been dead for as long. In the corner of the couch there was a hand clad in a black leather glove, a closed fist pointing its thumb in the air. The police were useless. The FBI said the next year they would be able to set up a trace program in case another picture was sent on my son's birthday. That was all they could do. On the 4th anniversary of his death, 2 men from the FBI sat with me as I stared at my phone with a new message. They read: "For you now." My son was in the back seat of a car. Clearly he was dead, but he looked fresher. I hated that word, but it was the only thing I could think of when I saw Dylan, his head lolled to the side, black eyes staring at the camera. A few moments went by before something else became clear. The picture had been taken in such a way that I could see through the window of the car. I could make out details: houses, cars, mailboxes. For one blazing second I thought this was the slip-up we had all been waiting for finally, but China made a mistake. We were going to find him. The FBI passed the picture back and forth. Then I saw it happen. I saw the look of color drain from their faces. What was it? I screamed at them. I demanded they tell me. They simply placed the picture on my kitchen table, pointed to one of the houses that you could clearly see. My old house, Dylan's house. More details emerged. Several black sedans parked on the street, FBI cars. You could see a gaggle of reporters on my front lawn. This picture had been taken only a month after the fairground. On my quieter days, when my nightmarish reality retreats for blissful moment, I take small comfort in the knowledge that Dylan had seen the end far earlier than in my worst imaginings. There's only a small comfort, like having a cushion to sit on while someone flays you alive. Then one of the FBI men pointed to the top left corner of the photo, past the body of Dylan, and through the back window of the car he was resting in. You can make out a figure, the giants, a featureless shadow save for one thing, teeth, a grin like the Cheshire cat that wanted to eat your skin. I don't remember screaming no on the 5th anniversary of Dylan's death. I'm sitting at my kitchen table. I don't have a phone anymore. I moved to the country and took my name off of any listing I could think of, but it didn't matter. He found me and left an envelope taped to my door for you. Story 26. I haven't slept in 4 days. My very being is begging, practically crying out for me just to lay down for a couple hours. I can't do that now, though I must stay awake. If I let myself drift off, I know it'll get me. I'm writing this as a warning to anyone interested in the subject of astral projection. Stay away. Trust me when I say that no good will come from it. I know that there are things out there, things that aren't human, things that will take any chance imaginable to latch onto someone. I know this. All because they're after me, you see. A week ago I found an online forum dedicated to that of astral projection. I read countless posts from people describing their otherworldly experiences when they quote-unquote left their body. People talked about flying, sprinting through space, and consciously manipulating their dreams to appeal to them. I was fascinated. I've always loved the feeling of dreams and the feeling of being transported to another world inside your mind, so I was very seriously wanting to test this out. I quickly looked up how one would attempt astral projection and found several methods on how to quickly achieve such a state of consciousness. I made sure first, however, that there was no negative health effects or mental cautions that came with these kind of experiences. To my elation, there were very little negative effects or warnings. The ones that were listed sounded like BS too, so I decided the next morning I would attempt astral projection. God, I wish I could go back and tell myself to stop. I wish I could tell myself what happened that stupid morning. It seems so long ago now. It almost feels like that morning was a nightmare that my brain dreamt up. I know that's not true. I can still remember exactly how it went. I know for certain what happened, and what followed was anything but a dream. I got home that night and went to sleep without a problem. I had my alarm set for 5:30 that morning, and I woke up extremely tired. All the websites said I needed to be in a drowsy and relaxed state of mind, so I got up, turned on the lights, and laid back down. After being woken attempting to project, I lay there for what felt like hours, doing everything that I was told to on these websites. At first I didn't feel anything, but suddenly I noticed there was an odd feeling developing in my chest. That's the feeling that grew in my chest, and the same feeling that I felt spreading everywhere throughout my body. I felt it all through the edges of my toes and fingers. Then suddenly I felt myself lift off the ground. My eyes were still closed, but I knew that I had elevated and had begun to float. I opened my eyes. I was above my body now. This was a very odd and very surreal thing. I can't describe how it was. It was so odd to be standing there as yourself while simultaneously seeing yourself laid down motionless. However, this didn't really make me feel any fear in that moment. What freaked me out was the fact that the lights in my room were off. I distinctly remember turning them on, which is why it was so unnerving to see something that also added to my immediate levels of uneasiness was the fact that outside my windows the sky appeared to be pitch black, not nighttime but pitch black, like being in a room with no windows and no light at all. That was the sky. I quickly looked around my room to make sure everything else was normal despite the lights and the outside sky. Everything appeared to be normal. I decided to try and walk around my house a little bit. To further my surprise, every light in my house was off. It was all dark, the sky outside, the rooms, even the house itself just seemed to emanate pure darkness. My exploring of the house was quickly interrupted. However, I was in the middle of looking into my guest room when a door slammed loudly upstairs. Now, for the record, I live alone. My house is barely small and I almost never have any visitors. There was no way this was just someone who happened to stop by. I stood there shocked, not knowing what to do. None of the sites I had read said anything about darkness or doors slamming. I snapped out of it and decided to head back upstairs to see what had made the noise. I quickly began to check all of the rooms upstairs. I found absolutely nothing. Just as I was about to head downstairs, I realized what the sound was. The door to my room had been slammed shut. I quickly made my way to the end of the hallway and stared at the door that I had almost certainly left open. First the lights, and now this. I definitely was alone. I opened the door and hesitantly made my way outside. It was much darker than the last time I had been in there, but the room seemed empty except for my motionless body that still lay on the bed. I quickly checked under the bed in my closet but still found nothing. I laughed at myself nervously for being so ridiculously paranoid. This wasn't real after all. I mean, what was there to be scared about? It's not like anything could hurt me in here. I stopped. I looked at my shoulder. Something had dripped on it, something black, something that came from the ceiling. I looked up. That was when I first saw it. I don't even know how else to say. It was just a thing. Imagine that really odd monster movie. What is it called? Nosferatu. Picture the monster from that movie with arms as long as his body. Picture him without any clothes. Picture him skinny to the point where his skin has pulled horrifically tight over every bone of his mangled body. Then picture him walking like a spider while contorting his limbs, and whilst having black sludge-like fluid leaking from his mouth. That was what was crawling on my ceiling. I quickly screamed and backed up. I was horrified. I had never seen anything quite as terrifying in my life. The creature dropped onto the floor and looked directly into my eyes. His eyes were empty sockets of pure darkness. I watched in horror as the gray skin around his eyes wrinkled, as his face contorted into a smile that was twice as big as its face. It had millions of tiny needle-like teeth. It continued to smile at me as I lay frozen in fear. It then crawled over to my body. The way it moved seemed so artificial. It moved like it was a claymation figure. My horror was only amplified when I saw it began to drool and spit its strange black fluid all over the right leg of my body. It looked at the now blackened limb and grinned wider. I realized quickly that this had to stop. I had to wake up. I made a quick dive for my body and tried to pull myself into my body. I saw the creature lunge at me, but it just barely missed me. I woke up screaming. I winced in effort as I tried to get out of bed, but realized in horror that I couldn't. I had completely lost the ability to move my right leg. I also noticed that there was an awful searing pain on my shoulder. I quickly called 911 and I was taken to the hospital. The doctors said they couldn't make heads or tails of it, and they ruled it was likely a psychological or neurological issue. They told me to get some sleep at home and come back tomorrow. I didn't tell them about the creature. I didn't tell them about my astral projection. What would I tell them? A creature from hell vomited on my leg, and I woke up with intense pain. After several hours of thinking, I decided it was probably just a temporary problem caused by my intense astral projection. That's what I get for trusting the internet on something like this. I guess I went to bed that night scolding myself for being so careless and throwing myself into something like astral projection so quickly. That night, however, was the cause of even more horror. You see, I dreamt I was back. I dreamt that I was back in the godforsaken dark version of my room. There I was again, Watching my body lay motionless on the bed, I watched in heightened horror as the creature from before lowered itself from the ceiling onto the bed where my body lay. I couldn't move. I could not physically bring myself to stop it from getting near me. I continued to watch, unable to look away, as the creature brought itself down right next to me. Even though it was whispering to my body, I heard the words it spoke right in my ear. It whispered in a hoarse and inhuman voice, one that sounded like that of a smoker who had recently been gargling wood screws. The words it spoke to me, I'll never forget. The creature leaned down next to me and whispered in my ear along to me. Now the creature then rapidly shifted position, placing itself directly above my leg. I watched and felt as I watched the creature retch and excrete more black bile and saliva onto my left leg. I wanted to move. I wanted to run, but I just couldn't. All I could bring myself to do was scream. That scream was enough to wake myself up from that terrible dream. Unfortunately, the nightmare didn't end when I woke up following the incident of my previous astral projection session. I woke up completely unable to feel my left leg. That was 4 nights ago. I haven't slept since. I've managed to drag myself to the computer, bathroom and kitchen and such. I've scoured the internet for anything at all that could help me from this and stop it from happening. I've found nothing. I'm writing this as a warning to anyone interested in the subject of astral projection. Do not attempt to astral project. Do not venture into a world you know nothing about. What lies in the world is only hostility and horror thereafter. Us. It's after us. I know it. I know it because it's after me. I know it because I don't have much time left. I don't know how much longer I can stay awake. I know that the next time I fall asleep it'll get me for sure. I know this because I can see it standing right in front of me. It seems like with every hour that passes the room just becomes darker, and the darker the room gets the more it becomes visible to me. It's watching me smiling. A horrible smile, but I saw it smile that day. I made the worst decision of my life. Please don't meddle with astral projection. Don't make the same mistake I did. I'll be gone soon, but I'm trying to get this message out to anyone who might take the same choice as me. Please, please don't. I'll get you. It's not long before it's gonna get me, and nobody deserves the hell I'm slowly descending into. I've been hearing it whisper to me for the past couple of hours, and he's slowly built into a yell. It's calling to me. It knows that I belong to it and that I can't stop it. That's why he's smiling. He's shouting now. All it's been repeating is one phrase: you still belong to me. God help me, and God help anyone who attempts astral projection. I only pray that this thing doesn't find you the way it found me. God, please help me. It's going to take me soon. I just want this to end. All I want is to sleep. Stay away from astral projection. Story 27. So this happened to me 7 weeks ago. I've never experienced sleep paralysis, so this is all new to me. My name is Leslie. It's my last year in high school, and I have trouble sleeping at night sometimes. I usually get 3 hours of sleep every day. When I stay up late, I normally like to watch my favorite TV show, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. So this happened on a Friday morning. It was 2:30, and I am still watching It's Always Sunny. I start to get tired, so I decide after this episode is done I would go to sleep. Once it had ended, I turned off the TV and went to bed. As I was sleeping, I noticed I was slowly starting to wake up, but my body was feeling like it was vibrating, and I kept hearing a big buzzing noise. Once I got to open my eyes, I couldn't feel my body move, and I couldn't speak. I could only move my eyes. I looked to the left corner, and what I saw made me feel terrified. I saw a shadow standing there looking at me. Maybe you guys are familiar with the movie called VHS2. If so, you remember the alien abduction scene. Do you remember how close those aliens looked? Because that's what it looked like. It had long and black fingers and long legs, and they were getting closer to me. I tried screaming, but instead I was humming. My humming began slowly fading away. At this point I tried to force my body to move, but I still wouldn't move. It felt as if my soul was being trapped inside. When my toes started to move, I woke up letting out a big gasp. I didn't know what was going on. I thought I had seen the devil in my room. I go on my phone to see what time it was, and it was 4:15 in the morning, so I decided not to sleep because I had school that morning. I went to school super tired with bags under my eyes, my hair all messy, and I didn't even bother showering. I was so traumatized by what I saw. I spent days not sleeping because I was too afraid that it would happen again. I would drink Monster coffee and Red Bull to keep me awake. A week and a half passes, and I did some research on what happened to me. I later found out that it might have been sleep paralysis. Maybe about 30% of people who have had sleep paralysis have had the same experience as I did. I haven't had anything like that happen again, and I hope I never see that alien thing ever. Story 28. Okay, so first of all, a few weeks prior to my main experience, I saw something in the sky above Birmingham, England. I was sitting in my back garden having a cigarette and admiring the beauty of the full moon when I saw something fly into view. It looked like, well, the shape of a deodorant, and to be perfectly honest, it was flying silently across the sky with pulsing red, white and blue lights running along the bottom of it, and a bright white torch-like beam shining from the top of it. It had no wings or anything of that sort. I had no idea what to think of it, but, well, there was nothing I could do. Perhaps it would be on tomorrow's local news. It was. No one else seemed to have seen it. Now on to the main part of my story. I have no idea if these two experiences are actually related, but the former seems to have some kind of relevance. Honestly so. One night my sister was staying over with her kids, so she had my bed, and I slept on the sofa. I laid down and fell asleep listening to true encounter stories with werewolves, which are my favorite on YouTube from a mixture of all different readers. I awoke to one of the most horrifying experiences of my life. I was paralyzed and instantly terrified. I woke with my face facing the back of the sofa and my back facing out to the rest of the living room. As I lay there paralyzed, not with fear but physically paralyzed, I could feel something going on with the back of my neck. It didn't hurt, but I could feel some sort of drilling sensation going on right on my spine. I tried to move, but I was not in control of my body, which was paralyzed but twitching all over, and all this time I could hear a sort of buzzing, whooshing sound. Honestly, the typical sound you'd imagine a flying saucer to make. Then, all of a sudden, a sensation of calm came over me, and I thought, oh, okay, it's just a reaction from the drugs I took earlier. I just have to ride it out and everything will be okay. I felt calm while trying to ride it out for a few minutes until I suddenly realized, hang on, I didn't take any drugs earlier. I don't even do drugs. The panic ensued once more. I twitched, lying there in horror for a few more minutes until I suddenly regained control of my body and quickly turned around to see the back door move as if someone had just run out. There were red, white, and blue lights flashing and filling the room, and here's where I might add that my living room is on the back. We have a large back garden and then another on the back of that. We are completely surrounded around my house. Basically, what I'm saying is we are far away from any roads, and it couldn't possibly have come from a police car or the like. Once again, the calm struck me. Oh, it's just the lights on the internet box in the corner flashing, I thought, but very quickly this time I regained my senses and realized there was no internet box. I have no idea what I was just thinking. Again, it was as if someone were trying to implant imagery thoughts into my head to keep me, like, from freaking out or something. I don't know. I was feeling very violated, to say the least, honestly, and very frightened. My dog, a large Siberian Husky, Arctic Wolf Cross, not easily frightened, was up on the armchair. Where the hell he knows he was not allowed to go. He was shaking and refused to come down all night. Was it all the dream? Well, considering I didn't get back to sleep, I very much doubt it. The rest of the night I laid awake, still twitching and feeling a weird sensation of a cold shooting down my spine and nerve endings every minute. I don't know what it was. Aliens were all I could think, but the next day when I told my friends, they all had a little laugh, and then one said, well, You said you felt something messing with the back of your neck. Let's see if there are any marks. They all looked, and they all sat in silence. There were 3 small red puncture marks in the shape of a triangle right on my spine. Story 29. The following is a 2-part story set in southwestern Sweden, about a 10-kilometer drive away from Gothenburg. The first part of the story happened to my friend. It was summer evening, and my friends were just out playing near the roundabout and relaxing. The sun had set for the night, but it's quite bright at night during the summer around here, so there's usually enough light to continue playing long into the night if one wishes to. The village has only about 500 or 600 residents in it. There weren't many cars that passed through. My friend was talking when one of them noticed in the distance some strange figures moving about, telling his friends right away. The others looked into the distance as well. They saw 4 or 5 completely white humanoid figures darting back and forth across the fields. They would run into view between a couple of garages before dashing out of view on the other side of the garages. It almost seemed as though they wanted to be noticed. My friends thought it might be someone pulling a strange prank, but the strangest part of it all was the complete paper white look they had and their strange deliberate run. It almost looked like they ran on their toes, hunched forward, flailing their arms forward in a crawling motion. Another strange thing was how they didn't make a single sound while running back and forth. This unnerved my friends, who began shouting questions about what the thing was. The reason I believe my friends in this story is the look on my friend's face when he told this. We'll call him Joe. He looked quite unnerved, and I've never seen him look so serious up to that point. What he saw clearly bothered him. Story 30. This event took place in September of 2017. I was visiting my longtime friend Mark, who was going to college about 4 or 5 hours away from where I had lived on the West Coast. Mark's girlfriend Karen and another friend of ours, Shin, packed up a car and drove out on a Friday afternoon. The drive was uneventful for the most part. At one point we held condoms out of the car window while going 90 miles per hour. We parked roadside and watched one hell of a sunset. We arrived late that night and met up with Mark, who gave us a tour of his dorm. Again uneventful. After an hour or 2 of playing pool in the rec room, Mark and Karen declared they needed to go and have some alone time as Mark's roommate would be out of town. Shin and I didn't love the idea of paying for a hotel, but Karen convinced Mark to pay for one so we didn't have to do it out of our own pockets. Shin and I were cool with this, and so we left for our hotel. Upon arrival at the hotel room, Shin starts up a Skype call with his girlfriend, who couldn't make the trip. I asked him if he wanted to go out to the farmland outside of town for some long exposure shots of the stars, but he declined. I was bummed at this news because I didn't know how to work a camera for the long exposure shots just yet, and I really needed Shin's help. That's when I remembered what part of the state I was in. There was nothing but small towns and rolling hills for miles. Freight trains in the middle of the field are easier to paint than in the industrial district of a major city, with no one around besides the occasional college couple trying to, do the do. Yes, I do paint trains when I have some time and money. You paint a train and it travels all over the continent. Some people do drugs for their high, while I see panels of trains traveling to cities I'll never see and get a high off that small world stuff. Anyways, I let Shin in on my plans and soon got the keys to the car, which Karen let us borrow, and left the hotel. I stocked up on paint at Walmart before driving through a couple of towns in a roughly an hour and a half time frame. I scanned the railroad tracks in both towns I passed through, but sadly I found no freight cars for which to create my art. My sadness did not last long, however, as I entered the third town and found several hoppers and gondolas parked between the wheat fields. I soon parked at a gas station and went off behind it into the darkness ahead, trying to scan for cars that didn't have paint on them already. I eventually found an old Canadian grain car, one of my favorites, and began to go through my bag of paint to start an outline. I quickly found some gloss white paint and began to work setting up a milk crate so I can reach higher up on the train. 15 minutes into painting, I hear a low gurgling sound about 10 to 20 yards to my 9 o'clock position. I look around myself, afraid of some farmer or something. Maybe he found me, or a gas station attendant on his break. Strangely, however, I see only a single tree in the darkness at the edge of the fields. I debate using a flashlight, but I decided against it, worried someone will see the light and I'll get in trouble. The gurgling sound soon stops, but then picks up in 3 to 5 second intervals. I began to become extremely curious about the source of the noise, as it was 2 or 3 in the morning, and I began thinking no one else could possibly be around. I used my hand to cover the LED light as I turned on my flashlight before flipping it on, pointing it at my chest first, then my feet, and finally the tree. The moment I did this, the gurgling noise faded out, and there was a dried up embankment between myself and the tree that figured must be a farm runoff due to the familiar smell of cow patties in the air. I say familiar because I used to live on a farm in the Midwest for about a year. The only thing I noticed in the embankment is a fuzzy tan bump. I didn't wish to walk towards it, so instead I climbed up on the ladder on the hopper I was painting. As I'm climbing, I can't help but feel like I'm being watched, as a sense of dread overcomes me while my back is to this thing and I'm climbing. Taking a look back at the gas station, I see no one. The only cars in the parking lot were mine and whoever the attendant is in the gas station. As I stared into the parking lot, I suddenly hear a rustling noise from behind me. I turn, flipping my flashlight on again, only to realize the tan thing in the embankment was a dead deer from my higher position, and upon further examination I realized it wasn't as tan as I thought it was initially. I could see a slight gray and purple, which I assumed was the start of decomposition of the animal. There was quite a bit of blood from a small wound in the deer's belly, which bled into the dirt. As I stare at the deer, I hear a sudden snap which jolts me, and I quickly climb to the top of the train car and watch closely at the tree in the distance. I found myself frozen in place as I tried to use visuals to look for any sort of movement near the tree. This is when I saw it in a small area between all the branches. In the lower left area of the tree, I saw little beads of white eyeshine move into place. At first I assumed it was a possum or raccoon. Eventually it became obvious it was way too large to be either. This gave me chills. I kept telling myself no, as this thing parted branches in what I assumed to get a better view of me. Getting a better look at the creature, I noticed it is smaller than I initially thought, skinny, and it's a gray-looking humanoid figure standing on top of the train. I shivered as this creature opened its mouth and let out an identical sound to a cockroach hiss. As soon as I heard the sound, I got the hell out of there. I made a beeline for my car. I heard one last faint hiss as I made it to the lights that lit up the gas station parking lot. Jumping in my car, I sped off, blasting music and using my brights all the way back to the college town. I was more hysterical than scared as I fantasized about a gray humanoid creature popping out in front of me as I sped down the road. In the end, I made it back safely. I broke one of the passenger side speakers in Karen's vehicle from blasting music so loudly and so long. I remembered that I'd also left spare cans of paint and the milk crate back at the train cars. When leaving, in a panic, I kicked myself for the thought of that spot would likely be compromised now, as they no doubt would have security out there in the future. Eventually, I figured it was for the better, however, and I didn't want anyone experiencing what I did out there that night due to the events of that night. I always stick to cities now when creating my art. I figured I'd rather run into a thug than whatever it was I ran into that night. Please take a weapon and a friend if you ever wish to wander into the boonies. You never know who or what you'll run into. Story 31. I wanted to share this story so that it will serve as a reminder to always follow your gut. Don't ever assume it just because you're in your own home and you get a strange feeling that you're just being paranoid. I'll give you an example. Several months ago, right as autumn was beginning and the days were becoming shorter, I was home alone at the house I shared with my roommate. Seasonal depression sinking in, I decided just to stay inside and have a lazy evening. I was on the couch flipping through Netflix when I got this overwhelming sensation that something wasn't right. It wasn't just a feeling of guilt or doubt because I wasn't being productive. It actually felt as though the world around me wasn't in perfect alignment, like something was out of place. It's the feeling you get while you're driving and one of your tires is slowly deflating. Unable to shake this feeling, I stood up, shut off the TV, and headed upstairs, not turning off any lights on the ground floor. Once upstairs, I turned on the hall light and entered the bathroom. I didn't feel like I was being watched necessarily, but I did feel this sense of invasion. I got some music playing on my phone and decided that I was going to take a shower, determined to distract myself and shake off this feeling. If I had had any pets, I would have looked to see how they were acting, but I didn't. I could only go off of how I felt, and I chose to ignore the feeling of unrest. Before I was done taking my clothes off, I thought I heard movement from downstairs. I muted my phone for a moment, but the noise didn't come again. I figured I was either hearing things or my roommate had returned home early and was downstairs. I didn't think for a moment that some stranger had entered my house. That's the type of thing that happened to other people. I forced myself not to think like that. I knew that all my doors were locked and I lived in a safe neighborhood. That's what I kept telling myself. I turned the shower on, finished getting undressed, and got inside. I stayed in the shower longer than I needed to. Being in there helped, but it didn't completely calm my nerves. As soon as I turned off the water, the feeling of invasion was back, and suddenly I decided that I needed to be very quiet. I stepped carefully out of the shower and turned off my phone. It was then that I noticed under the crack of the door there was a shadow of someone standing just outside, and the only thing standing between me and that person was an old wooden door and a latch lock that anyone could break if they threw their weight into it hard enough. I stared down at the shadow, and finally I allowed myself to panic. Had it been my roommate or a family member with a spare key, they wouldn't be standing that still. They would knock on the door and announce themselves that they needed anything. I didn't even hear anyone breathing. The scenario flashed through my head of me not noticing the shadow throwing open the door in an obvious fashion and having a knife driven into my gut as I fell into the arms of a masked stranger. I slowly put on my shorts and my shirt and just stared at the shadow under the door, still unmoving. After another moment, I made a decision. I slowly began to open the bathroom window. I flushed the toilet and lifted on the wooden frame. I then stepped up and then hung my legs out the window. As I was sliding out fully on the roof, my head knocked against the blinds and made them rattle. I swear in that split second my heart stopped and I heard movement from outside the door. I looked out the window right as I heard the door crash open behind me. When I slid across the roof, I immediately let myself fall to the cold ground. I picked myself up and sprinted across my lawn without even bothering to look back to see if anyone was chasing me. I ran to my neighbor's house, pounded on the back door until they let me in, and I called the police from my phone after they locked the door behind me. When they got there, they searched my house and discovered that it was empty, but inside every single room they found evidence of footprints and signs that someone had been rummaging around through drawers and personal belongings. The intruder had been wandering from room to room while I was in the shower. Outside the living room window, they discovered very specific DNA that indicated that he was watching me as I was laying on the couch. This guy had patiently waited for me to leave the ground floor before entering the house through the back door. He then waited for me outside the bathroom when he could have easily broken in and grabbed me. There was 1,000 things that could have gone wrong that night. I could have ignored my gut feeling. The intruder could have been less and less patient. I could have shut lights off behind me. He could have waited down the hall instead of outside the door. I really believe that I had 1 in 100 chance of getting out of there, and I rolled the dice and beat the odds. I should be dead. I have no idea who that guy was or why he chose my house, but I do know one thing for certain: I will never doubt my gut feeling again. Please take this to heart, everyone listening. Try to always be aware of your surroundings. Play it safe even if it feels silly, and never ignore your instincts. Story 32. All throughout the mid to late 90s, I spent my time alternating back and forth between my parents, who had divorced when I was 6. During the summer, I preferred staying at my dad's single-story ranch-style house in a quiet cul-de-sac as opposed to my mom's place in the city. My dad's place was much quieter and had a better feeling of privacy with its big fenced-in backyard. During the warmer months, I would enjoy sleeping with my window cracked open and my fan on. In the city, it was always too noisy to have a window open at night. I remember at the time my dad was usually working late and would arrive home around 8 p.m. or later, so the majority of the day I was alone. I would spend my time on my dad's computer using the dial-up internet. Back in those days, if you wanted to use internet, you had to keep in mind that you were sacrificing your ability to use the phone. You also had to sit at a desk all day when you surfed the web. On this particular day, it was getting pretty late, and I had been sitting for a while, so I decided to get up and make myself a snack. The sunlight was fading outside and it was just starting to get dark, but I didn't turn on any lights as I walked down the hallway and turned into the kitchen. Using the light from inside the fridge, I began to shuffle around looking for something to make a sandwich out of when I heard something that made me pause. Back inside my room, I had a lamp on my nightstand that had these tiny charms hanging from the shade. Whenever I went to raise or lower my window, the nightstand would shake and the charms would make tiny wind chime type sounds. I was used to the sound, but I had never once heard it from outside my room because I was the only one who ever touched my window, and for such a small sound I was surprised how far it traveled. There was this animalistic moment where my entire body froze, and I felt my sense of hearing dial itself up to 11 as I strained to catch every small noise coming from my room. I heard a couple of footsteps on my carpet, some muffled voices, and I heard the creak of my door opening. I let the fridge door swing shut and rushed over to the back door, but as soon as I opened it, I paused. Out the back door led to our screened-in back porch, which led outside to our fenced-in yard. Going through the screen door would make way too much noise, and whoever was now in the house would be able to catch me before I was able to unlock the gate to exit the backyard. I would have to run back towards the intruders to get to the front door, so not knowing what else to do, I ducked into a small closet right next to the fridge where my dad kept the vacuum. There was barely enough room inside for me to stand up straight, and I knew that if they happened to open the door, I was caught, so I kept my hand on the doorknob to hold it closed. I heard 2 sets of footsteps walking down the front hall, and suddenly somebody was in the kitchen. He wasn't even being cautious. He was just sauntering around, opening cabinets and drawers like he belonged there. I heard him open the fridge right next to me and knock a few things around inside. I heard an annoyed voice coming from the hallway. "What the hell are you doing?" The second voice responded, "I'm starving, man. I haven't eaten all day. Get the fuck out of there." The first voice snapped the fridge door shut abruptly, and suddenly there was a tug on the handle of the closet I was hiding in. I tensed, and I held the door latch firm. All the guy had to do was pull on it hard, and I would have toppled right onto the floor. "Hey, this one's locked." The voice came from right outside the door. As soon as I heard it, I knew I was done, and I mentally prepared myself to be kidnapped or murdered. The second voice came again over by the back door. "Hey, did you open this?" "No, why?" Then somebody was just here. They must have run out back. I heard both of the intruders run out to the back porch. I could have taken that moment to run, but I was shaking so hard at me nearly getting caught that I didn't trust myself to try and take a step. I thought about trying to go for the cordless phone on the counter, but I remembered the dial-up internet was still using the phone line. After another few moments, the 2 men ran back into the house and made for the front door. I heard the front door unlock and swing open. They hadn't been out of the house for more than 5 seconds before I heard a police siren wailing as it drove past the house. Turns out my neighbor had spotted the 2 men walking around outside and called the cops as soon as she noticed them opening my window from the outside. They were kids themselves, really. One was 18 and the other was 19. My dad arrived home shortly after, and we ended up staying at my aunt's for the night. I was incredibly shaken for the next several days, and the smallest of noises made me anxious, and I was too afraid to be alone. Looking back now, those 2 kids likely would have taken off running if they had found me. They didn't even have any weapons on them, but at the time I didn't know that, and the experience traumatized my tiny 11-year-old mind, who would have thought on a quiet cul-de-sac with houses surrounding me on all sides and the sun not even completely gone that my house would be invaded. The city may be noisier, but at least at the time it was safer. Story 33. My friends and I live in the hills of Moville, Northern Ireland. Last year the 4 of us were walking along the cliffs by the seaside and arguing about Conor McGregor when my friend pointed out a row of power lines running up away from the road and further up into the trees. Had we not been thrown out of the pub we normally frequented the previous night, we probably would have just headed right back into town for a drink, but given that we had nowhere better to be, we decided to try and find out where exactly these lines led to. The area we were walking was extremely rugged, and the closest thing to a road that led through the trees was 2 tracks of flattened ground where vehicles had clearly passed before. We walked deeper into the woods, half concentrating on the power lines and half on the wheel marks, just making dull conversation and not expecting to find anything interesting until the wheel marks just ended. The power lines fell off the last pole a few yards beyond where the wheel marks stopped and kind of wound their way through the tree branches. To clarify, they weren't broken, just kind of awkwardly placed across the tree limbs, which I had never seen before. My buddy wandered deeper into the trees and discovered a 6-foot-tall wire fence encircled in a small clearing with a 2-story stone house sitting there like a lost heirloom. We circled the fence until we found the gate, which was carelessly hanging open, and we walked right up to the front door. Privacy and common sense were not present. The first thing I noticed was that there were security cameras mounted outside the house pointing in various directions, and I considered what kind of person would go through all the trouble of setting up cameras just to leave the gate open. It didn't end there. The front door was open as well. The 4 of us walked right inside. I hesitated in the entryway while my friends immediately split up to look around. I went to shut the door behind me and spotted 4 deadbolts on the inside frame, and suddenly I had a very strong feeling that it wasn't right, that we were all just trespassing here. One of my friends found one of those metal detecting wands on the kitchen counter, like the ones you see TSA agents using in airports, and in a back room another friend found 2 backup generators. Despite them being there, it was obvious the power hadn't been working in the house for quite some time. The whole place smelled musty, like the outside forest had invaded it with its cold earthly scent. I asked if it was possible that this was a secret military base of some kind, but one of my friends pointed out that there was no weapon cabinets, and there hadn't been any checkpoints outside either. I wanted to leave, but the others decided that they wanted to search upstairs, which turned out to be one giant room. There was a cot in the corner, but most of the room was occupied by a long table with chairs and a flat-screen TV mounted to the wall, which I presume was meant to view the footage from the security cameras while the other guys dug through the drawers looking for anything interesting. My friend, a man, started fidgeting with the flat screen like he was going to take it down off the wall and carry it under his arm over the hills the whole way back to his own place. The whole time I just stood by the steps, impatient and ready to leave. I was starting to get the sense that this place was some very paranoid person's hideaway, and that he may have left in a hurry. This house was very much hidden away where no one would think to look. I admired the view from the window where I could just make out the sea through the trees, and then I turned to head downstairs, and that's when I froze. There were black marks like ash standing the carpeted stairs to about the halfway point. That definitely had not been there when we climbed the stairs. I spoke aloud, "Whoa, wait, how?" And then the smell hit me. There was a burning fabric scent in the air that washed over me, and I immediately coughed and started panicking. I hesitated for a moment before rushing down the stairs, keeping as close to the sides as I could. And then I went right out the front door without looking back, my friends following close behind, each of them making remarks about the sudden burning stench in the air. I asked if anyone had tracked the ash on the stairs, but I already knew the answer. Not only had none of us tracked marks across the carpet, but none of us had only gone halfway up the stairs. I suddenly had the horrific thought that someone else had been in the house with us the whole time. We immediately left the area and headed back to the coastline. Halfway back, we heard a loud roar from behind us. Story 34. It could have been an animal, but to me it didn't sound impartial. It sounded infuriated. I decided that I didn't want to be involved at all after that, but a couple of my friends went back a few days later. They told me that there had been a burn spot directly outside the entrance to the stone house, and when they sifted through the loose soil, they had pulled an entire Ouija board out of the dirt. Sometime later, I talked with another friend of mine about it over a couple of beers, and he told me that he had heard rumors that there was a group of psychotic people who lived out in those woods, and they believed in things like ancient curses and demonic possession, and that they were known to be violent towards outsiders. I don't know what was going on in the house that day, but I feel like we were very lucky that we didn't encounter anyone while we were there, and that we all made it out in one piece. Story 35. I used to work as a haunted house technician at Busch Gardens in Williamsburg, Virginia. During the months of September and October, the park would put out an event called Hollow Scream. The park transformed into a massive Halloween-themed experience, with multiple uniquely themed attractions such as vampires, zombies, and clowns. The haunted house that I worked at was called Fear Fair, which consisted of a maze that branched in between several buildings and tents. I was there to maintain the maze and fix anything that broke over the course of the night. Sometimes the guests would punch our spooky decorations out of fear or tripped over each other and knocked over some lights. It kept me pretty busy. While the maze was open, I was normally just out of sight making adjustments to the audio and checking in with my co-workers on my walkie-talkie. One Saturday evening, there was a heavy downpour, which deterred much of our potential business. I used the downtime to work on the wooden frame that served as the entrance to the maze. I placed a sign across the line entrance stating that the maze was temporarily closed, and then I got to work. After a few minutes, I left to go pick up another tool I needed from the maintenance shed, and when I got back I noticed someone strolling around, walking down the tunnel deeper into the maze. He was a young man, maybe in his late teens, with a dark complexion, long braids, and was wearing a dark blue tank top. The only way in was past the sign, so I was irritated not only that he was trespassing, but because I had disassembled part of the wall, and if anything had tipped over or fallen, he could have been hurt. I called out to him, "Sir, we're not open yet. Did you need help with something?" Up until that point his back was turned to me, and when I called out, he visibly jumped, and I couldn't help but think, geez, he's freaked out and nothing's even turned on yet. He gave me a strange look like he was sizing me up, and for half a moment I thought he was going to try something, but instead he responded, "No, I just thought you were open now." I explained to him that Fear Fair would reopen shortly after I finished my repairs. He nodded and walked past me at the entrance without making eye contact with me again. I decided just to give him the benefit of the doubt and assumed that he was just impatient and wanted to take a look at the maze. After I was done assembling the entryway, I took the sign down and started to prepare the maze. The scare actors arrived on time and took their positions, but there wasn't very much business that night. The grounds were all soaked from the rain, and we probably had more employees and guests wandering around the attraction. Shortly after 9 p.m., I was getting ready to close the maze for the night as it looked like it was going to start raining again. That's when one of the actors walked up to me and took me aside. Hey, I didn't want to say anything over the radio, but there's this guy with braids and a tank top back in the corridor behind the maze. I don't recognize him and I don't know why he's there. I immediately remembered the trespasser from before and made my way to the back corridor. I turned on all the backlights and poked around any place I suspected would give an intruder enough room to hide. I peeked out the back exit and shined my flashlight around, but I still didn't see anything. I locked the back door and then walked through the maze, instructing all the scare actors that they could leave. I turned off the fog machines and switched on the overhead lights so I could get a better look around. It wasn't unusual for drunken guests to wander out of the boundaries. But if this was the same guy I had seen before, I was worried that he may be waiting and just might be stalking one of the actors. It doesn't really calm your nerves wandering through an empty maze filled with horrific life-sized mannequins of demon clowns trying to find someone who may or may not actually be there. Somehow being silent in there made it even worse, because then you start to question whether or not the faint sounds you do hear are from your own imagination. After another 15 minutes, I decided the maze was truly empty and started shutting off everything behind me as I made my way back towards the entrance. Just as I had switched off another set of lights behind a hidden circuit board and was standing in the dark, I heard the footsteps coming loud and fast. I heard them coming from across the room, making the beeline towards me. In response, I turned on my flashlight and shone it in the direction of the footsteps and saw that it was the same guy from before, charging right at me with a prop mallet. When my flashlight beam hit his face, he slowed down for a moment, stunned and blinded. And I took that opportunity to book it out of there. I knew the maze better than this guy did. I could navigate it well enough to keep ahead of him. Sure enough, I heard him cursing and bumping into things behind me as I ran. Once I exited through the opening of the maze, I waved down two security guys who covered the entrance until the police arrived. The local police were always on call nearby in case a fight broke out or someone was injured. They went into the maze without hesitation and emerged about 5 minutes later with the guy in cuffs. He had surrendered peacefully, and he almost looked as though he was relieved that the whole thing was over. The police informed me that this kind of thing was actually pretty common as part of a local gang's initiation ritual. The new recruit must sneak into a park, find a weapon and a place to hide, and record themselves knocking somebody out, and then leave the park through the front gate like any other customer. That mallet may have only been a prop, but it was still made of wood, and had he brought it down on my head hard enough, it would have knocked me out cold. Had he not been so obvious with his attack, I would have never seen it coming. After they took my attacker away, the police swept the entire park and found two more young men hidden and waiting for an opportunity to strike someone. None of this ever made the local news. I suspect that the park didn't want that kind of publicity. Ever since then, I've made it mandatory that any employees wandering through the attractions have to travel in pairs. I was in the kitchen making dinner for myself when I heard a knocking on the front porch. This wasn't a common knock like someone might be waiting for me to open the door. It was more like a few loud taps close to one of the front windows. I paused and glanced around from where I stood in the kitchen. I could see the front door and one of the front windows. All the lights on the ground floor were on, and with it being dark outside, all I could see in the windows was the reflection of the inside of my living room. I waited for a few moments, but when the sound didn't come again, I shrugged it off and continued concentrating on the stove. After maybe 5 minutes, long enough for me to forget about the sound, it repeated itself, this time from the front window at the far side of the house. Mark. I called out, thinking it might have been my brother. There was no response. I walked over to the front of the house and peered outside with my hands pressed to the side of my face, but I couldn't see anything. I turned as my brother came down the stairs. "Did you just hear something from around back?" He said I held up a finger to indicate that we should pause and listen, and almost on cue we heard footsteps calmly walking across the wooden floor of our wraparound porch just outside the dining room wall. "There's someone out there," I said quietly, more angry than scared. It was at this point that we should have locked all the doors and called out the window that we were calling the cops, but I was a stupid, headstrong kid and pissed off that someone was messing with us. I remember my brother asking if the person outside was trying to distract us, but I was already at the gun cabinet. I should point out that I was raised with guns and I knew how to properly handle one. I pulled out the 9mm from the drawer and loaded it. I'm going to scare him off. I told my brother lock the front door behind me before I could even give him a chance to argue. I was marching to the door with a gun in my hands. I threw open the door and stepped out onto the porch. My brother then flicked on the outside lights, and right there about 8 feet in front of me was a sickly thin guy wearing a hoodie with light blue eyes and a soul patch on his chin. He had been in the process of stepping onto the porch, but the moment he saw me he spun around and ran like a bat out of hell. I took off running a few yards after him, then stopped, pointed my gun in the air, and fired off a shot. "That's right. Fuck off," I cried out. I waited until he disappeared into the trees before turning around to face the house. I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say that for a few moments my heart stopped. I felt that momentary wave of ice water through my veins and the painful thudding of my heart in my chest as it tried to correct its rhythm. There was at least 8 other people standing around my porch and a handful more scattered around the yard. They were mostly men, but there was also at least 2 women, all dressed in dark jackets and hoodies, looking mostly like they were in their early 20s. None of them said anything. Instead, they all just stared at me, their hands mostly in their pockets, and I couldn't tell if any of them had weapons. Then they all just scattered. Some jogged away, but most of them just walked off in different directions out into the woods. I legitimately forgot for a handful of seconds that I was holding a gun until I raised my hands to my face and felt its weight. I sprinted back to the front door and pounded on it until my brother let me back, and I had no idea what to tell him. I had just fired a gun up into the air, and none of them had cried out or made any sound whatsoever. Had they had been drunk or something and were trying to pull a prank, they would have said something. They would have been like, "Whoa, sorry man, wrong house, put down the gun." But all they did was just look at me like I had just ruined their surprise attack, and more disappointed than scared, they all just wandered off. I had no idea what to make of it. My brother turned on all the lights in the house and called the cops, who to their credit arrived within 10 minutes and swept the perimeter. There were footprints everywhere, and they asked my brother and I numerous times if we had just had a party. I kept telling them a dozen or more people had just been loitering around our house in the darkness, but the cops didn't seem to take it that seriously. They asked if the strangers had threatened us, and I had to admit that they didn't in any direct way. They confiscated the handgun after I told them that I fired off a round, but they eventually returned it. I have no idea to this day what those people were doing that night outside of our house. My brother suspects that they were part of some kind of cult and maybe have been setting up to perform some kind of ritual, and maybe that we were set to be human sacrifices. I thought it more likely they intended to break in and rob us, but saw the gun and bailed. That doesn't explain the silence, though. None of them muttered so much as a sound as they looked at me, and just as if instructed by some signal, scattered all at once. I've read that during alleged UFO sightings, people can become hypnotized by lights that appear above them, and they wake up hours later in entirely new locations, having no idea what happened or how they got there. I can't dismiss that kind of possibility. They all seem to be hypnotized. That group of people has never returned, and I haven't even caught a glimpse of anyone I recognize from that night in town. We bought our dog not long after. Thank you for listening, and I wish you good health. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to support us. Thank you very much.